everybody, and welcome to the Cinema Psych podcast where psychology meets film. I am your host, Dr. Alex Swan, and I gotta say, we have a very special episode. You are listening to episode 100. Now, I didn't think I would ever reach episode 100 when I first started doing this podcast 6 years ago. But here we are, and I am so friggin' excited. I am so excited that we are here. We've reached 100. I've reached this milestone. Now, the funny thing is, Podbean, the word that you see everywhere when you go to the website, the service that I use to host these audio files, Podbean was like, hey, congratulations on your 100th episode when I published episode 99, because the first episode of the series was what I called episode 0, all the way back in 2019. July 27th, 2019 was when the first episode came out, which I called episode 0. And right off the bat, I was like, this is not episode 1. This is episode 0. I wanted to introduce the kind of show that this was going to be, a mixture of psychology, a mixture of fun, a mixture of filmmaking and quizzical, trivial tidbits, and then just a chat between two or more, as we'll find out in this episode, two or more just other goofy or smart or amazing or all of those characteristics in another person, another educator, another psychology nerd, if you will. And some of them are also film nerds too, like me. So this episode, as a special episode, it's going to be the trope, if you will. The trope, which is what you find in films all the time, and TV shows, I suppose, is going to be a clip show. And I wanted this episode to serve as like an overview of the past 6 years of the quest that I set myself upon in July of 2019. Yes, this episode comes out about a week before the true anniversary date, which is the July 27th. This one's coming out a little bit before that, but the 6-year anniversary nevertheless. It's missing a couple of published dates here and there for hiatuses or vacations or just breaks that I've taken over the years. It kind of worked out. It worked out, and I am I'm so pleased at how it has worked out. 6-year anniversary, 100th episode. Let's do it. So in this episode, what we're going to do is we are going to use a clip show. And to break up the clips is, again, one of the features of the show has been to, highlight the ways in which the films portray various psychology concepts that many guests and people I've spoken to over the years, even before starting the podcast, have been related to, how might you use these things to either learn or teach psychology, that kind of thing, right? So the portrayal is really important. Is it accurate? Is it not? How does it promote critical thinking? Guests over the years have discussed how they use film in their pedagogy, their teaching, how film as an art form is useful for lots of different things in explaining and prompting various modes and ways to think about life and all the things within life. So I want to first start with a clip that was essentially the mission introduction of the show. And you can see, or actually you can hear the difference, right? So this is from episode 0. And this clip is what I wanted for the future of the show, right? And the title of that episode is An Introduction and a Memento, because I briefly talk about Memento for the future. An introduction and a memento for the future. And I love it. I love how I did that. And I was just like, yeah, hopefully that's what it is, right? And so I want to jump in there, and you can hear the difference between how I started and where we're at now with like building this podcast, building this show, building that future. So here's what I said I wanted this show to be like.
So what's this podcast all about? Well, it's where all of psychology meets all of film, really. we're going to take deep dives into the psychology of various films. And all of psychology is up for grabs here. So we're not just going to focus on psychological disorders, mental illness, or anything like that. We will sprinkle that in sometimes here and there, but we are going to focus on more about the cognitive aspects, the social aspects, the developmental aspects, the behavioral aspects of psychology. And each week, I'm going to have on a good friend, a fellow psychologist, a fellow educator who really loves film.
As you heard, it's been my aim and the aim of all of my guests, whoever they've been, to build this kind of resource for learning and teaching and exploring psychology and film, right? Like I said, not only psychology concepts and talking about them and the research and all of that, but also like filmmaking. This has been a way for me to explore my second passion in life, which is filmmaking and film studies, all that kind of stuff. I do need to get back into reading my film studies book, but it is still a passion, and I still like exploring filmmaking, who's behind the camera versus who is doing the acting, yada, 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 all of that stuff. So for the clips, what we're going to do is break them up into subdisciplines. And I did a fairly loosey-goosey job of breaking up many of the episodes into genres of psychology, I suppose. We're going to start with cognitive psychology. And that is on purpose because I'm a cognitive psychologist by training. And that's my bread and butter, if you will. But before we do that, I mentioned a little bit ago that I wanted this show to be a resource. And it's been a long time coming, but for the 6th year anniversary, one goal of mine was to beef up the website, the companion, if you will, to the audio. Because you can get the podcast pretty much anywhere you get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, TuneIn. You can listen directly on Podbean. I post my episodes on YouTube, Amazon, Pandora, iHeart. Those are the links that I have on the website that'll take you directly to the podcast on those services. So you can listen to it anywhere you want to. But for every new episode, I post the website link to that episode from the main website. And it's been a long time coming, but some of the things that I have been able to do over the last couple of months is really beef up the kind of site that I had envisioned back in 2019. So I got inspiration from other people whom I link on the website as other resources for what kind of site that I wanted. I wanted it to be not only just a place where the episodes live, right? But I also wanted those episodes to be a database, a place where people can go and look for help. Not everyone uses film in their teaching. Not everyone wants to. Not everyone knows where to start if they do want to. So what I've done on the website, and you find it at cinemapsychpod.swanpsych.com. So it's a subdomain of my main domain that I pay for my academic website. But, this is a great use of that tool, right? So Cinema Psych, name of the show, pod, all one word, .swanpsych, my last name plus psych, PSYCH.com. And here what I've done is I've created a static homepage that has a lot of links to various things on the website, so you can just use that. And it's got a little bit of a word cloud for the tags that I've created for each of the movies that have been on the show. I've separated out the episodes into their blog-like form, right? So it's just, those episodes go in a 10 per page format, and you can click through those pages. So there's about 10 per page. There's about 10 pages of posts at this point, right? But then I think my biggest accomplishment in adding functionality to this website is the films page. The films page features It's technically in reverse chronological order of appearance on the show, with a little bit of goofiness for some of them, but for the most part, it is the shows in publication order. But you can sort them any way you want, and I've painstakingly grabbed all of the posters from IMDb, and I put them on here, and you know, when there's a new episode, there's going to be a new film, and they're sortable by date, by name, and all sorts of things, and you can search them. I've added directors, actors, titles, but I think the biggest thing that I've added for the films is the tags. Right, I wanted this to be a database, so it's not as, like, I would say, as comprehensive as maybe some other search sites. Like I don't know if I necessarily have the knowledge to do that, but I've created a massive list of psychology concepts that I have linked to each movie, and you can search for those things. Sometimes you search for something and it probably won't pop up. But if you search for, you know, like something like cognitive psychology, it will pop up all of the films that I've tagged with cognitive psychology, right? So that's a broad one. But then, you know, I could add one that has something related to people's attitudes or people's bias or social influence. Sometimes if an episode of the podcast has some discussion of film techniques, I'll add in film analysis. So there's a ton of ways that you can look through these movies, and I'm really pleased with how it turns out. It's got a little bit of, you know, the posters pop up. And when you click on a film, like I just clicked on The Big Year, which is a few episodes ago, not only does it have the IMDb link to that title, so you can look at more nuanced information, trivia, quotes, etc. I have the blog post link to it, which is the episode, and you can listen to it directly like there. So The Big Year, episode 97, using my ambition and bottom-up processing for birding. The Big Year with Marc Klippenstine. Okay, so it is, I think, a very useful directory, right? The other thing that I've added to this website is the resources module or page. And this is really for people who want to learn more, or for my colleagues who want to use film in their teaching, right? Teaching psychology through film. So I've added my presentations and research on this topic, okay? I have an abridged list of references, and I think all of them, except for a book or a couple of books, have links through DOIs or, you know, where the websites that I retrieved them from. Now, this list is not a full list. It is one that I have on an upcoming paper that I'm working on, so just keep that in mind. There are definitely more links out there. And then I've included some other teaching resources, you know, my syllabus from the time that I taught psychology of film back in 2019, which led me to wanting to do a podcast about it, right? So I was teaching, and then I'm like, I need to do an ongoing show about this, right? So that's how it coalesced. And then some assignments and some other teaching sites. And then I've also included some information about accessibility and availability. And a lot of discussion comes about with using film in class and copyright. And I think it's important to note that when you use a film or TV show or other artwork or anything that has a copyright associated with it, there is the Fair Use in Education carve out in the Copyright Act, which is really important. Now, if you're going to use a streaming service to show a film, then you might be violating their terms of service, which is not the same thing as violating a copyright owner's copyright. It's very different, right? So I always recommend digital copies if you can, because then you don't have to worry about that streaming service violation. And this is what you see when you look for reasons to use or not use a movie in class. And then, of course, a lot of people just use clips. And, of course, that is part of the Fair Use in Education carve-out, okay? Especially with teaching face-to-face. Online, it's a little stickier, right? Because who has access to it? That's That's a really sticky one. And then, of course, some one of the things that comes up is, accessibility for blind and deaf students. And I think that's a really critical piece to consider if you have blind or deaf or hard of hearing students in your classes, right? And so not only subtitles, but audio descriptions, especially for blind students, right? Public domain films. And then I, of course, linked Canopy. Now, this page is a work in progress. As soon as I come across a new resource, it's going to go on this page, okay? The other thing that I wanted to do is, if you are an avid listener of this show, you probably are familiar with many of the voices that have appeared in many episodes. So on the About page, are the folks who have appeared in 3 or more episodes on the show. Now, 3 or more of 100 is a lot, and counting, of course. But I wanted to showcase these folks, and they talk directly to people who come and talk to me on the show, which I think is great. Contact, the contact page has a guest interest form. So if you are a person who has some knowledge or credentials in psychology, I'd love to talk to you. I really would. And I'm pretty open to anyone. So there is a link or a QR code, and you can put your information in there and I will contact you. You can catch us on Facebook, Threads, or Instagram. Facebook, SinSciPod, CIN, not SIN, SinSciPod. And then Threads, CinemaPsych_podcast, same as Instagram because they're connected. I got rid of Twitter. Right now, Blue Sky is just me, and then I'm posting the episodes through my own academic public-facing profile on Blue Sky. So there's no direct. But you can also contact us at cinemapsychpod@gmail.com if you are so interested. I love it. Now, here's the part where I'm like, okay, I like doing this podcast. It's great. And if you can help out with that, that would be amazing. So I've got a merch store. You can get a whole host of different kinds of merch. It doesn't have to be clothes. It can be pins. It can be a coffee mug. I got myself a couple of coffee mugs last year. Oh, so good. A couple of designs that are on there. A couple of them, yes, were designed by AI, and it's because I don't have a lot of money for artwork, and I am not artsy myself. But then the original design, which is the face with the film camera coming out of the brain and the projection coming out of the eyes on a sort of an orangey background, that was designed by an artist back in 2019 and has been the main logo on all socials and podcast services for the entire run of the show. So you can get that design as well. You can help me out. You can help me out with hosting, with whether it's the website or the Podbean service, or how I do double-ender podcasts through a company called Zencastr, which allows me to have remote conversations with people who have various levels of technical ability to do the best kind of show that I want to give, that I want to publish to the world, I suppose. But you can donate directly to the show on the website. Any money that I get through that donation goes directly back into the podcast, whether it's hosting or some other service or app that I use to create the show, anything, right? So I've got a couple of really affordable options. Or you can donate whatever you'd like on the website through PayPal or Venmo or through a credit card. All of it goes into a separate PayPal account. And I use all of that money to go back into the show. So if you can support the show, I would really appreciate it. And any guests moving forward, appreciate it too. Because I do have a full-time job that has to take precedence most time of my life. So it's always great when I get to do this sort of thing. that's enough about some of the changes to the show and our 6th anniversary, our 100th episode. It's amazing. So let's jump in to the clip show. I'm going to introduce each clip and then sort of when each clip ends, segue from that clip to the next clip and introduce who I'm speaking to, the film, etc., etc. So without further ado, let's jump into the clips, shall we? All right, let's get started first with cognitive psychology. As I said a little bit ago, that of course we're going to start with the subdiscipline. Why wouldn't we? You know, this one is my revisit to Memento. So as I said, the first episode of the series, episode 0. Yeah, it's an awkward phrasing, right? The first episode of the series was a discussion of Memento and amnesia, but I revisited Memento because I'm like, okay, well, that really wasn't a full format show that I did the first one. So I wanted to revisit it and give it the same kind of exploration that I had given other movies up until that point. So this is from episode 39, where I revisit Memento, and I, in this clip, describe what amnesia is and how the film uses it. Okay, first and foremost, as I said before the bumper there, this is a story about memory. And it was a short story written by Jonathan Nolan, and he adapted it into the screenplay for his brother Christopher. And it's specifically about a character who suffers from anterograde amnesia. So what is anterograde amnesia? Well, let me try to explain this the best I can without visual aids, of course. So imagine a time point where brain trauma occurs. Okay. So time point, brain trauma. So there's some sort of brain trauma. Now, retrograde amnesia is the kind of amnesia that you see presented quite frequently in soap operas and other kinds of TV shows and movies, where the character doesn't remember things that happened prior to that time point of brain trauma. So that's called retrograde amnesia. And that's the kind of amnesia that most people are familiar with. So that's the kind of amnesia where it's like, I don't know who I am. Can somebody help me? Can somebody tell me who I am? What my name is? You know, dramatic, of course. And retrograde amnesia generally occurs with trauma to the cortex, because that's the kind of idea here is that when a new memory is formed, it's essentially distributed out to neurons in the cortex part of your brain, the stuff that you're probably most familiar with, what that represents the brain, the convolutions and all of that, essentially the outside bits of the brain. And so when there's trauma to the outside of the brain, let's say a concussion, then it's entirely possible that the cleavage that happens when your brain is tossed back and forth inside your solid skull, that at those cleavage sites, connections are broken and cells end up dying and you forget stuff, which, you know, is likely to happen. But most of the time, retrograde amnesia isn't as significant as it plays in the movies and TV shows. Okay, but that's not the kind of amnesia that's in Memento. The kind of amnesia that's represented in Memento, as I said, is called anterograde amnesia. And this is the inability to form new memories from the point forward of that brain trauma. So from the time that brain trauma occurred later in that person's life, into the future. So not being able to form new memories, okay? Not being able to form new memories. Just a quick definition of that film, and continuing on some additional cognitive themes, let's jump into emotions, shall we? So let's explore when emotions took center stage in an early episode, episode 10, alongside my guest, Dr. Molly Metz. We explored the film Inside Out. To get us started with emotions, what are your major takeaways with how emotion is presented in the film?
Start with an easy question, didn't you? So the first thing that I think we need to start with is the theoretical perspective on emotion that this film espouses. I mentioned that in the questions that I talk about with my students. Right. So to kind of expand on that a little bit, there are multiple theoretical perspectives on what emotions are, how they develop, what they contain, how the different pieces are related to one another. And just like any area of research, there isn't one theory that is absolutely correct.
Right.
This movie, given that it was done in consultation with Keltner and Ekman, definitely espouses a basic emotion model.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so this basic emotion perspective has a few key components to it. I think one of the most important parts to it is that emotions are discrete, meaning that we have the emotions like anger, fear, joy, sadness, and disgust in this movie. Other basic emotion models include other emotions that were not included.
Yeah.
In this film.
To interject here, Pete Docter, the filmmaker, he was like, no, we can't have all 7 or whatever because that's just too many characters for kids and others to follow. So he told the 2 of them, nope, pick 5.
Well, and I mean, that's fair. I mean, so I think that, so these 5 are consistent across most basic emotion models.
Sure.
I would say Ekman would also include surprise as the 6th, although like the difference between surprise and fear is kind of muddy and not at all clear. But other basic emotion models over the years have had 10 or 11 or 26.
Oh, I did not know that. Oh my goodness.
Right. So that's way too many characters. This is not an ensemble show. So these 5, though, are the 5 that most of these models have in common. So it's a good place to start.
Sure.
Now, this basic discrete perspective kind of places each of these emotions as categorically distinct from one another. So anger is anger, and that is qualitatively and categorically different than joy, which is different from disgust. Each of these emotions coordinates all of the different aspects of emotion, by which I mean the cognitive appraisals, the physiological arousal, the behavioral responses, the subjective feelings that go along with an emotion. So this categorical perspective says that when you signal like fear, when you set off fear, then that's going to bring up all of the associated fear-related programs in the brain, that they all work together. Yeah. The other part of the basic emotion model is that they are innate rather than acquired or learned, that these are, that we are born with them. This implies a biological or a genetic basis to them. This is most consistent with an evolutionary perspective on the functionality of emotion.
Right.
So I do think that that's one of the coolest things about this movie, and one of the most valuable things about it is that it really shows that emotions serve a function.
Right.
And that's actually, I mean, that's something that most models of emotion would agree on, regardless of how you think emotions are structured or how they are developed. They serve a purpose, right? Joy is not just about feeling good, and sadness is not just about feeling bad.
Now, cognitive psychology is the only subdiscipline that is going to get 3 intros because it's my show and I can do whatever I want, right? So in continuing our discussion of cognitive psychology, the second episode, or the third episode of the series, technically episode 2, we finish with some problem solving in cognitive psychology with Dr. Marc Klippenstine as we discuss the problem solving in Castaway. Now, you and I, like we said, we both rewatched the film, and you had mentioned the problem solving aspect to me several weeks ago, and when I rewatched it, I watched it with that lens, and we were making notes on this film, and we basically came to similar conclusions, but you had a differing viewpoint from my, I'll say you had a different viewpoint from my total viewpoint, though you did share some of my analysis. So what I want to do is pit those 2 ideas together, or pit them against each other, let's say, and not so that they're one's wrong and one's right, or one's better than the other, but that they're 2 different ideas about problem solving that I think this film really can carry both of them. So what is your general idea about problem solving in this film?
For me, the problem solving in this movie kind of takes on a Gestalt approach. This idea that the sum of the parts is greater than the whole kind of concept. It starts with this idea that you have to kind of represent this problem idea in your mind, and then you kind of have to restructure that problem to be able to come up with solutions to it. And so it's kind of both of those aspects playing off each other, that restructuring and representation kind of going back and forth as you kind of come across this problem idea. You're on a desert island and you need water to survive. So you have to reorganize and restructure that concept of what water is or what you can drink, and then try to solve that problem from that point. And we'll talk about this, and I think we'll talk about this in a little bit. But using coconuts to obtain that water, or rather, something to drink. This idea that, you need water. I don't have water. How can I restructure and reorganize my environment to solve this problem, to come up with a solution that will let me survive this situation? Kind of taking this concept idea of, the problem idea, and looking at it in a whole way, and looking at those pieces in such a way that when you put them together, you're recreating and restructuring something that wasn't necessarily there to begin with. And this approach specifically has a couple big problems that you often see where you're trying to solve these problems. And those kind of relate to functional fixedness is one of them. And mental set is the other one. And so both that functional fixedness and mental set kind of play together and kind of get in the way of successfully solving problems sometimes. This is, these are things that are hindrances that I see regularly and daily in our lives. We have a cattle farm, and so a lot of what we end up having to do is take something that was made for one purpose and use it for something else. This idea that I've fixed a lot of stuff with baling wire, and that was not its intended purpose, but yet it works for that situation. So when you're looking at functional fixedness, it's this idea that it's a hindrance because people hold certain objects as having a particular function. And sometimes it's difficult to use it for a function that is not its intended purpose because you are so locked in on the idea that it can only be used for one of its original intended purpose. And so there is this hindrance that occurs in this situation. So if you have an idea of what you can do with something, that can sometimes cause a hindrance in your ability to use it for something else. Unless you can break that functional fixedness and get beyond that, sometimes you're trapped in that idea of what that tool can be used with or can be used for.
A good example that many psychology students will see, and maybe the lay public might be familiar with, is Dunker's famous matches and the candles problem. Participants were given a scene, and they were told, here are your materials for making a shelf that the candle can stand and be lit. And in one scenario, they are told that it's a box of matches. And in another scenario, they're just told that they have they have matches and the candles. And in the first condition, the one where they're told they have a box of matches, they can't get past the fixedness of that is a box of matches. But in the other condition where they're just told they have matches, they quickly see that they can make a shelf out of the box that the matches come in. And so that's an example of the functional fixedness of the box of matches that many students are told about Dunker's research back in the middle of the 20th century.
Yeah, I love that example. It's one I frequently use in class because I think it's just a great example of how we problem solve. One of the ones that was brought up to me from a student is they were talking about taking the door off the hinges, and so they get that first pin out of the hinge because there's no weight on the door. It's all level and everything's good, and get that first pin out. And then for the next 20 minutes, they're trying to find something that will pop out that other pin in the bottom part of the door. And it took them forever to figure out that, hey, I'm holding something that fits perfectly in that hinge, the pin that I just took out. And it's just a great example of that functional fixedness idea.
Wow, that's actually really good.
I'm just thinking, man, that's a great example. And he's holding this thing that is used to hold the door together. This pin is used to hold the door together, not necessarily as something that is used to take the door apart. Just a perfect example of a real life example of how this happens.
It's a fascinating exploration of problem solving, especially when you're all by yourself and you cannot, problem solve with other people. Really ridiculous. A great movie, nevertheless, and always a great conversation that I have with Marc. Okay, let's move on to the next subdiscipline or area of focus in psychology, social psychology. This first segment of the pair is a exploration of many social psychological concepts, and specifically social influence and persuasion. I had Dr. Jordan Wagge and Jason Spiegelman, two frequent guest hosts, join me together to talk about both the 1957 and 1997 versions of 12 Angry Men in episode 38. Do what we do on the show and pull out the psych hats and talk about some concepts that are pretty clear in this film, I think. I've used it in the past myself in a social psych class, and I specifically had the class watch it right after we were done talking about persuasion and other forms of social influence. So persuasion is sometimes considered social influence, sometimes it's not. We can talk about it all together, but we can jump into persuasion first and then hit the other three: compliance, conformity, and obedience after that. So what was your favorite persuasion technique?
I think that one thing that I really enjoy thinking about in this film is something that many people have written about, but I actually disagree with it. And one of the arguments that people make is that in either episode, the 57 or the 97, people have argued that juror number 8, who is the lone standout, the lone dissenter at the beginning, that he is attempting some probably non-conscious version of the foot in the door technique. That if he can get one person on his side, right, then he is going to be able to continue his argument. And it appears from sort of a cinematic perspective that, once one juror flips, we sort of all know where this is going very early in the movie. And I would argue that that's actually not correct. And the reason for that is the first juror to flip, again, in both episodes, is juror number 9. And after they take the secret vote and they say, juror number 8 says, you all take a secret vote, I'll abstain. If you all agree, I'll flip and I'll go with you. And then juror number 9 flips and says, no, I'm voting not guilty. In the movie, they have a little bit of back and forth and argue about why he changed his vote. And he says, I'm going to tell you why I changed my vote. And here is where I think foot in the door fails. He doesn't say, I changed my vote because I'm now convinced that the guy's not guilty.
He didn't change his vote. I did. Oh, fine.
I know it.
Would you like me to tell you why?
No, I wouldn't like you to tell me why.
Well, I'd like to make it clear anyway, if you don't mind.
Do we have to listen to this? The man wants to talk.
Thank you. This gentleman has been standing alone against us. Now, he doesn't say the boy is not guilty. He just isn't sure. Well, it's not easy to stand alone against the ridicule of others, so he gambled for support. And I gave it to him. I respect his motives. But the boy in trial is probably guilty, but I want to hear more. Right now, the vote is 10-2. I'm talking here. You have no right to leave this room.
I don't think that that's foot in the door. And I've seen a lot of analysis of this movie that says that foot in the door is a major persuasion technique or compliance technique that is taking place here. And I don't think that it is. Now, again, whether you consider that compliance or persuasion depends on the textbook you're reading. But that's something that I think if you look a little bit deeper into juror number 9's reason for changing his votes, we have a really different sort of concept taking place.
That is interesting. I don't know if I had ever classified it as foot in the door myself. That never occurred to me, whether or not it was because it wasn't right or not, up for debate. But I never said, hey, that's a foot in the door technique right there. Also, I probably would not have said that if I was talking about persuasion, because I usually do foot in the door with compliance, and I talk about them separately. So that I would agree with you, Jason. It pains me to say, but I would agree with you there. Because that you're right, that I don't think that's foot in the door. I do think, though, it is persuasion. I mean, he's appealing to all of their sensibilities. And it's kind of hard to not think that he's attempting at least some persuasive technique. You know, the whole, you could almost argue that it's a not so subtle reverse psychology reactance. Like, hey, you know, you guys do your vote and I'll sit over here. And then juror number 9's like, this guy. So it could be anything like that.
But I think your point is really good, bringing it back to the idea of reactance. Juror number 8, you know, Lemon or Fonda, several times somebody says to him, "Why should we believe you?" And he says, "I'm not asking you to believe me. Why should we think this kid is guilty? I didn't say, or not guilty, excuse me. I didn't say he's not guilty." And he takes a really glorious approach. And when they keep asking, "Why do you think this?" he says, "I don't know. I don't know if he did it or not. I don't." And my favorite line, by the way, is, "I don't know if I believe him or not. But I'm not willing to just vote guilty to get out of here so that Tony Danza's character can go to the ball game really quickly." So I think the idea of working in almost a reverse reactance. If I tell you you have to believe it, you're not going to believe it. So he says, I'm going to avoid that approach. I'm not asking you to believe anything. I'm just telling you that I don't know. And I think that's really brilliant in terms of persuasive technique.
Oh, yeah. Because, I mean, for some of these men, they don't really care about this defendant. Jordan, you have any thoughts on persuasion? What's your favorite persuasive technique?
I like all the system 2 stuff. I don't know. In social psychology, I think it's like the central route of persuasion. And this is totally like my stats and methods mind, right? But as predictable as this is, I really liked the knife, because we do tend to think about events as being like ridiculously improbable. And when Jack Lemmon, I'm just gonna refer to Henry Fonda because I like the 57 movie more. When he pulls that knife out and is like, it's really not that coincidental. That was a good moment. But my absolute favorite was when he tested the speed that the old man would walk. No, not the knife. The speed that the old man would walk down the hall. Because he didn't know, right? He didn't know what the time on the clock would be. Time perception is terrible. This is like the cognitive psychologist in me, right? It's like everybody thinks they have good time perception, but nobody like really wraps their head around. Just like everybody thinks they have good memory, everybody thinks they have good whatever, and we don't. And so he gets the information. Like, he is being a scientist right there. He is like, let's get the information we need and reconstruct it, and like see what just the data says about how fast a fast man dragging his foot would get from the bed to the hallway and to the front door. And I thought that was really brilliant. That was that was like a reminder to me of like what I try to do every day, of like, I don't know what the outcome to this will be, but let's test it.
The other one that I wanted to feature was my early discussion of within the timeline of the show with Dr. Olivia Aspiras, where we discussed the conformity and relational aggression found in Mean Girls in episode 5.
So I wanted to give you the opportunity to guide this conversation. I think what you found was quite a bit more than what I've found. Coming in with, social psychologist goggles on and your research background and all of that, I think gives you a great amount of authority to discuss. And your notes really show that different aspects of the film and different psych techniques. I pretty much only found one. So I'll talk about my one in a little bit, but I wanted to go ahead and give the floor to you on, I think, what is the and after reading your notes, what I think is the biggest psych concept that is present in this film. And so what is that?
Conformity.
Yeah, conformity.
Which is changing one's behavior, your own behavior, because of the presence of other people, whether it be they're directly there in front of you or just kind of the knowledge about other people is going to change your behavior.
Yeah, right.
So in Mean Girls specifically, there are a lot of really specific examples, but kind of broadly throughout the film, we see Katie's transformation into becoming plastic. So she comes in not really knowing anything about high school in this type of setting. And so once she becomes friends with the plastic, so Karen, Regina, and Gretchen, we see this change in her behavior where she's trying to fit what they're doing. So just at the very beginning of the movie, you already see when they say on Wednesdays we wear pink, that she asks Damien, do you have a pink shirt I can wear? Because right away, even before she's really become friends with them, she starts conforming to their kind of standards. They have their dress code that you only wear jeans or sweatpants on Friday. And so...
Oh, and we only wear jeans or track pants on Fridays. Now, if you break any of these rules, you can't sit with us at lunch. Well, I mean, not just you, like, any of us.
They tell her that from the very beginning, and she changes her behavior, starts following that dress code right away.
Oh, we always vote before we ask someone to eat lunch with us, because you have to be considerate of the rest of the group. Well, I mean, you wouldn't buy a skirt without asking your friends first if it looks good on you. I wouldn't? Right. Oh, and it's the same with guys, like...
Yeah, and I think part of that is in the other side of the plot, which is Janice Ian's plot to undo Regina's hold on the school and her just I don't know. Well, I guess we'll call it hatred. There's some conformity there too, because Janice is like the puppet master almost, and Katie is following her commands to infiltrate the plastics, and then Katie likes being plastic. And later in the film, Katie becomes the leader of the plastics for a short amount of time. So poor Katie's being pulled in two different directions, and she's trying to fit into both groups. And I think it's hard for high schoolers to fit into more than one group, right?
Yeah, definitely. And especially because Katie comes in without that prior knowledge of really how to act or fit in high school. And one of the reasons people conform is not just social approval, but for these informational reasons, you don't really know what to do, so you look to other people for how to act. So she has kind of both ends here of the information, not knowing what to do, and wanting this social approval, wanting to fit in. So she's really, just being pulled in all these different directions, trying to figure out how to behave so that she can fit in and make friends in high school.
All right, next up is the, broad category in psychology, biopsychology, and neuroscience. And I really enjoy the first entry that I have in this. And of course, this entry was going to make it into this clip show. Absolutely. I talk about this episode every single year when I describe the 10% brain myth to my intro psych students. This episode was episode 9. And it features Dr. Christina Ragan, where we quote unquote rage watched the film Lucy and completely went through a deconstruction of the 10% brain myth and how this film is a bad example, but useful nevertheless in one's teaching to show that it's a bad example. It's not good. It's not good science. It's the 10%. It's the 10% myth on the drug that is presented in the film. Does that make sense? Like, the drug makes you super, like, freaking aware and stuff like that, and they just turn the myth to 11.
Yeah, I mean, it goes beyond normal human abilities.
Right.
Just when we're getting into the supernatural of it and like becoming other like non-corporeal forms, that's where I'm like, where does this come from?
You just got to unlock your brain power.
I could see better vision, right? That I could see something like that happening. I could see better hearing. But like moving things with your mind,
Yeah.
Get it.
So let's give the listeners some background on the 10% myth.
Yes.
So the 10% myth is as one of those myths that won't die. You said you found a poll before we started recording. What were the details of that poll again?
Yeah. So few years ago, about 2,000 Americans were polled asking whether they believed that we only use 10% of our brain in any given day.
Mm-hmm.
And 65% of those polls agreed.
Yeah, that's a bit troubling. And like I said, it's the myth that won't die. It's a little more, at least the stories that I've been told. I've heard some variations on its origin, but the origin that I've read into and looked into about where it got its start was with one of the early American psychologists, William James. So this was around the turn of the 20th century. So if we're talking about myth and you bringing up the fact that you brought up a couple of years ago, 65%, this myth is like more than 100 years old. I'm sure there are older myths, but let's let psychology have its place in the sun. In one of his writings, he opined that humans were apparently only using about 10% of their cognitive potential. And he described cognitive potential as intellectual ability more than physical aspects of the brain. I mean, it's a vague phrase. He was more of a philosopher than a psychologist, in my opinion. But he was suggesting something that was kind of technically, at least in my opinion, innumerable. Like he was like, yeah, 10%, that sounds like a good place. It's just low.
Right.
And brain power or brain usage or the phrase they use. I'll come back to the phrase they use. I'm on my rant horse now.
I know I'm like all amped up.
We're getting down into this, and so the phrase they use in the movie is brain capacity. That seems like there's some finite value to it, and so there's a disconnect there, right? But William James was just referring to how he saw people were just not intellectual. They weren't intellectually curious. They were lazy, intellectually lazy, or even physically lazy. They just decided, he just saw that people were content with going about their days as almost automatons. And, I would imagine through the years, people thought similar things, even before him and after him. And it's probably a smug and elitist thing to say that, most people are anti-intellectual or apathetic for cognitively stimulating endeavors. But it's William James.
Yeah, he was Mr. Cool Cat. He was so Mr. Cool Cat, spoke a bunch of languages, got a medical degree that he didn't really use.
Right.
Yeah. So, he's going around saying that, look at you people, you're not even trying to think critically.
Your brains are amazing.
Why aren't we all scientists?
And then the myth then began through an historical game of telephone. So it was misrepresented, and then it was misrepresented again, and it was misrepresented again, and again, and again, and again, and you end up with a shortening to 10% of the brain. Boom, done. 3 words, technically, when you write it out. 4 words, I guess. And there you go. It's simple. Brain is an organ. People know that. 10% number. People know that. Boom, done. And the rest becomes a horrible history of psychology.
Yeah, I mean, I've even heard it be accredited to like the self-help and self-esteem movement. Just imagine your potential. If you use more than 10% of your brain, you're doing yourself a disservice by just using 10% of your brain. And so, I mean, I don't get it, but people kind of take it as gospel.
They do, don't they? And for the second clip of this category, I chose episode 74's conversation with Dr. KatieAnn Skogsberg, where we discussed At First Sight, a drama based on a true life recounting by Dr. Oliver Sacks on a patient that he had who underwent surgery to remove or at least reverse his retinitis pigmentosa. And we talked about visual perception as well as the true life details of the movie itself.
Knowing that it was based on one of the short stories from an anthropologist on Mars, I enjoy Oliver Sacks. I still have a very soft spot in my heart for him and for his writing. And so I thought, well, this could be good. This could be interesting. But of course, movies always have to make it a little bit more dramatic. And yeah, it was based on, and I'm doing the air quotes here since this is audio, based on a true story.
Yeah, the trailer does the old text on the screen, inspired by a true story. Yeah, there are differences between Virgil, Val Kilmer's character, and Cheryl Jennings, the real life person. We'll get into those similarities and differences as we go through. But I wanted to ask you, you told me, KatieAnn, that you watched this recently with your sister. How did that go?
She found it, as I think I discussed with you a little bit ahead of time. We both found it entirely watchable. I wouldn't say that it was, it's not a movie that I'm going to say you should rush out and buy the DVD if anybody still does that. But it was entertaining. We enjoyed it, and it was fun to be able to talk to somebody who really doesn't know anything about visual attention and perception, but was still curious about the film. And she had some interesting insights about seeing the world, or trying to understand the world through someone else's, well, literally not eyes, not their perceptual, but their other perceptual experience, and trying to see the world from someone else's perspective. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah, I think the film does a decent job of showing the sighted world, what different things blind individuals have to do and have to deal with, and what would happen if someone got their sight back. And of course, the differences in real life and the movie sort of bleed a little bit. It starts to get fuzzy as to what is true and what was capable in the 1990s for this, and then what happens after the procedure. So I like hearing that side. Did your sister ask you whether or not this was possible in real life, if this was an actual medical experience treatment?
No, she did not ask if that was possible. She seemed to accept it.
Okay.
And I don't know if that was just a suspension of belief because it was a film. But actually, no, she didn't. And I did struggle with it a little bit conceptually, thinking, okay, well, if he had retinitis pigmentosa, then that's a, degeneration of the retina in there. But then they made the argument, well, I don't know. They didn't know how much it had progressed and what did he have to lose. So yeah, it's a movie. You have to suspend some belief.
So I talked about how I use this movie in my sensation and perception class. And I've been using it now for the past 2 years. This was my third time using it fully. I had skipped a time. So I'd used it, and then I used a different movie, and then I came back to it. And it's just a really good deep well for the film analysis papers that I ask my students to complete after watching this movie. How might you jump in to use this movie in your sensation and perception, KatieAnn?
Well, this is where I want to give a shout out to Nestor Matthews, who's a professor. I believe he's at Denison. And he gave a talk at NITOP, and I'm blanking, National Institute of Teaching of Psychology. Is that right?
I believe that's right.
Okay. Just last year, he gave a talk on this about using sensation and perception, or teaching it from a disability standpoint. And I've taught sensation and perception since I started teaching, back when the dinosaurs were in class. And
some smart dinosaurs.
And it opened a new window, or new perspective to me to teach a class from a disability standpoint. And so I think that was my first thought and that's another reason why I raised my hand and said, I'd love to do this, because I thought, wow, I could integrate that into this refreshed version of sensation and perception that I'm going to be using.
Yeah. And I love that perspective. I love that perspective.
I just this last year incorporated An Immense World, the Ed Young book about the perceptual abilities of other creatures, other animals. And that really blew my students' mind. So I thought, wow, that would be a really interesting way to integrate, different abilities. And again, coming back to this film, there was one moment in it where I can't remember whether it's Virgil or his sister, but basically said, he doesn't have a disability. This is, he's adapted to his environment. This is his world.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And that kind of struck me as, he doesn't need to be fixed. He's fine the way he is. And this is a little bit of a digression, but I think it adds to the conversation, at least in my context, is the town that I live in and where I teach also has one of the first and still one of the remaining schools for the deaf.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so we have a very large deaf community here. And so
awesome.
That whole argument about, deaf culture and having that their hearing is just the way they were born and the way they are, and that doesn't need to be fixed.
Right.
And so that really kind of struck me as well. And I thought, well, the perspective of Amy, the other character, the love interest in the movie, of where she's like, well, but if we could give him the chance to see if we could fix him, wouldn't it be worth it?
While the film is kind of kitschy, it is an underrated gem in the sensation and perception portrayal world. I love it, especially the ones that are, based on, true life details. The next subdivision of psychology is going to feature learning and behaviorism. It's difficult to find a film that portrays learning and behaviorism in the ways in which you teach them in a college class, or even, an AP psych or a regular psych class in high school. But there are a few gems out there. So I wanted to highlight the first episode, the one with a number, episode 1, that featured a guest and featured the most frequent guest that we have had on the show in the last 6 years, Dr. Wind Goodfriend. She assisted in getting the show off the ground too, and for that I have an immense gratitude for. So in this episode 1, we talked about A Clockwork Orange. And while the film is gnarly, the book is gnarly, we, in this clip, discuss how classical conditioning is a strong feature of the narrative and the film itself. This film is useful in psychology for a number of reasons, but I think what you and I both really focus on is the psychological concept that's screaming at you for, I would say, a good portion of the film, in sort of the middle section of the film. And that's how conditioning is represented. And we mean conditioning in the traditional sense of the word, right?
Right, the Pavlovian sense of the word.
Right, exactly. So because you did write a Psychology Today piece on this, I'll defer to you on explaining it. So what about the conditioning that you see in the film makes it Pavlovian or classical?
Right. So when I'm talking about this with my students, we start with just what is classical conditioning, right? And lots of people are at least a little bit familiar with the classic study done by Pavlov with dogs and salivation, right? So the idea is that Pavlov, he didn't intentionally study conditioning. That was sort of an accident in his lab.
Yeah,
but
it's a great story about that.
He was studying digestion with dogs, and he's trying to measure how much they salivate. And they started to predict that they were going to be fed by these cues that they had learned in their environment, such as him walking down the hallway and him wearing a white lab coat. And it was messing up his experiment. So he actually started to train the dogs to only salivate when they heard a noise. And the urban legend is that it was a bell. Now, Pavlov didn't actually use a bell. He used a metronome and a tuning fork and a whistle. But everybody always says bell. So, okay, just putting out there, it's not actually a bell, but for the purposes of today, we'll say bell or noise. So he trains them to hear this bell, and they learn that that's a cue that they're about to be fed. And so after multiple pairings of bell leads to food, they start to salivate when they hear the bell. So they've learned to make this association in their environment. And it's an automatic, instinctive reaction. So Pavlov is arguing that it's really on the physical level for the dogs. They're not sitting there logicking it out, really.
Right.
So that's where we see the classical conditioning in the film. So Alex is this very violent character. He's a murderer. He's a rapist. He assaults people on the street. And so he eventually goes to prison for murder. And he is...
Which I will say, by the way, since we both recently watched the film,
right,
it's almost an accidental murder. And when you see his face, when they say that the old woman was murdered, he's
right,
like, wait, what?
That's interesting, though, because is he upset that he murdered someone, or is he upset that now he knows for sure he's going to go to jail?
Yeah, ambiguous.
Right.
It looked, I mean, from a personal standpoint, it looked like fear to me, but
right,
you know, yeah,
fear like, oh, I'm screwed now.
Possible, yeah.
Not like regret that I just murdered someone.
Potentially. But continue, yeah, go ahead.
There are a lot of really debatable things in the movie, which is one of the reasons I love it. So anyway, he goes to jail and he ends up this treatment that he gets all excited about, because instead of spending years more in prison, he can get out in 2 weeks. And so the treatment ends up being this classical conditioning where they give him a shot several times a day, and they don't actually tell him what the shot is, but the shot is going to cause him to be nauseated a few minutes later.
Right.
And before the shot kicks in, they hook him up to this machine where he's forced to watch really violent movies. And as he's watching these violent movies, he starts to feel the nausea. And so the classical conditioning for him is whenever he starts to think about violence, he has this physical instinctive reaction where he starts to feel nauseated.
Yeah. And that's the quick classical conditioning. And eventually it becomes it becomes learned in the sense that his body does it automatically. Right. And they go through this whole song and dance number of showing it to, you know, the officials, the warden of the prison where he was from, and other members of high, I suppose, British society, that when he tries to act violently or lasciviously, he can't because he wants to barf. They never show him barfing, though.
No, he starts to sort of get gassy and he sort of goes into the fetal position. But even the thought of violence instinctively causes him to feel this nausea. And that's the classical conditioning piece to it.
Yeah. And it really shouldn't be confused with the other major form of conditioning that many people might be familiar with, which is operant conditioning, you know, the patterns of reinforcement and punishment. And I think it's important to distinguish the two because a lot of words get thrown around in the film that pull you to operant conditioning because the word punishment is used, right?
Right.
And it's specifically used by the doctor.
Right. Which is unfortunate from a pedagogical point of view.
Right. A pedagogical and pedantical point of view.
Right.
Yeah. He says, oh, it's just a punishment. And what is that punishment, Wind?
Well, when the doctor is referring to the punishment, he's talking about what I think we would refer to as compound conditioning. So basically, Alex isn't particularly enjoying the nausea, but he doesn't get really upset about this treatment until he realizes that the score, the music in one of the films is Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. And Alex has this kind of quirk to his character in that despite his horrible violence and toxic masculinity, he really likes Beethoven. So he starts to feel this association where when he hears Beethoven's Ninth, he then feels nausea. And that's what's really upsetting to him. And so that's the punishment that the psychiatrist or psychologist who's sort of overseeing this notices and says, oh, well, here's the punishment aspect.
Right.
Which is interesting because it implies that what was happening before was not supposed to be punishment.
Yeah, that's true. That it was just, science.
Right.
Treatment. We're going to make this person better. But, if he hates Beethoven after this, if Beethoven makes him physically sick, then
Right. And so it's sort of a happy coincidence from their point of view. But the term from psychology would be compound conditioning, where now we sort of accidentally conditioned him to the Beethoven as well as to the violence.
Yeah, it's a double whammy from Alex's perspective that both of them now cause this nauseated feeling. He also describes it as like numbness and
just general unpleasantness.
Mm-hmm.
And
that wanting to snuff it or kill himself.
Right. And that becomes pretty important later in the film.
I think I'd hazard a guess and say that I probably wouldn't show this movie again in my classes because students are just like, what did I just see? On a more lighthearted note, versus a Clockwork Orange, Dr. Jordan Wagge appeared in another episode about learning. And in this one, episode 41, we discussed the Bill Murray classic, What About Bob? And I want to preface this by saying this discussion was hilarious and fun and so great, but it highlights there are two aspects of the film, and so we pull the learning that I use in my classes for What About Bob, but then there's also a discussion about Freud and psychiatrists, etc. It's a great episode. I think you should listen to the whole thing if you have not yet. I'm also struck by the use of baby steps for somebody clearly suffering from a whole host of different like flavors of phobia. So there are object-based phobias, you know, like being afraid of animals or blood or, you know, something physical, right? But then there are like situational phobias like claustrophobia, agoraphobia, and then there are what's the third type?
Social.
And then yeah, I guess social phobia. Well, yeah, maybe. No, there's it's event or events maybe. I'm not entirely versed in all of my phobias, but because you can be afraid of things like paper cuts or getting a paper cut. Maybe I guess that's a situation. Be that as it may, this dude's got a lot of things that he's afraid of.
Right.
Bob, of course. And baby steps may not help some of those things, right? So there are two different kinds of behavioral interventions for somebody who has phobias, and only and one of them has to do with like ratcheting up and doing so-called baby steps. But then there's the other one, which is flooding, which you see in both cases. Actually, I think that's actually one of the. I don't know if this is necessarily one of the smart things that you had pointed out, but I thought this was interesting to me. He does both in the movie. He does baby steps for some things, which don't necessarily help the elevator, for example. Baby steps into the elevator. Okay, well, what happens then, my friend?
Right,
you can't take more baby steps.
Right.
But then he does flooding, which is just an exposure to the phobic object or event or situation all at once by going sailing.
Oh, I was thinking of the death therapy thing. But yeah, the sailing.
But then, yeah, so what was the death therapy? Because I think that's like the biggest one. Fake, by the way.
Yeah. Just, tying him up, strapping bombs around him, leaving him. Well, he also left him alone in the middle of the wherever.
In the woods, yeah.
Abandoned him. And like left him to sort of deal with like, what is this, like, what is the worst thing that can possibly happen? And so to me, that was an example of flooding. Mm-hmm. What I thought was really clever about it was, and again, I wasn't even thinking about the sailing. So I think it's really clever that like the baby steps didn't really work. And that was like what Marvin's whole thing was like,
yeah,
he wrote, and this is just, God, this movie really captures like a certain kind of person, right? I want to say a certain kind of man. Let's just say a certain kind of person, but he writes 1,000-page book. Like this book is gigantic.
Yeah, it is really thick.
And it's like the most ridiculous concept of like, it's so pop psychology of like, just take the most simple explanation you can think of, which is just like, try to do this a little bit at a time. So yeah, so it's just like this simplest idea that you could possibly propose. It's like, just, these idea of baby steps. And he's very clearly suggesting this as like a panacea for like curing. It's like whatever this person is going through, baby steps will help them, which is like so totally not true. Not true.
No, not at all.
And then the thing he tries to do that was like the most heinous thing of all, he wasn't trying to help Bob at all. And it ended up like being a form of flooding therapy. And I am. It's just funny because it's a movie. Like, that is not something you would want to do with somebody.
No. You'd have to get their consent.
Right.
Oh God.
First, you have to go through medical school.
Yeah, exactly.
Or a PhD program.
Or at least
the master's.
Program, right.
Yeah. But
yeah,
he wasn't trying to do anything like that on purpose. I just thought it was a clever comedic trick that, like, this thing, which is like the very opposite of a baby step, is what actually helped him.
The exact opposite. Oh, so clearly on the nose there. Okay, so the next subdomain of psychology that I want to explore here in this clip show is the developmental world. And I always jokingly refer to this world as my weakest understanding in psychology. I had one lifespan course as an undergraduate, and it was a lifespan course, so I didn't even spend that much time with children. I would say that we probably spent the half of the semester on like child development through adolescent development, and then the other half through like various later stages of life, including death. And so I would consider this my weakest subject. And the discussions that I've had on the show about developmental psychology have been so gratifying because I've learned so much. And I've been able to incorporate some of the things that I've learned into my own discussions of developmental psychology within, cognitive psychology class, right? I can talk about development in that way or use some of the things about development in history of psych, for example, that kind of thing, right? So this first clip is my good friend, Dr. Karen Brackey. Congratulations on your retirement, Karen. And in this clip, we discussed the comparative language research with chimps that she did when this film came out, Project X, in the late 1980s. Really fascinating discussion, and I definitely suggest listening to the whole thing because it's wonderful.
Hey, we have a psychology grad student in a movie as a main character, and she's not, clinically analyzing anyone,
exactly,
or not stereotyped in that way. So that was good. But yeah, in terms of the apes, I don't think they were actually communicating. They were clearly intelligent, and intentional. And there was that eye contact there. They had human relationships. I suspect they were trained for the movie to do these particular actions. I know I was actually looking up, like you, I was kind of looking on the web to see more about the making of the movie. It was actually controversial because there's some allegations out there that, ironically, in making this movie about supporting animal rights, they actually didn't always treat the animals real well.
I was afraid of that.
So that's a little disappointing because these are, apes that are way stronger than we are. They seem to be fairly tightly controlled. They did a lot of cool things. They were very good in their roles, right?
Yeah.
There were clearly things that they did that were, showed their intelligence. But I imagine they were trained for a lot of those. You could tell, when they sat down, they were being told to sit down. They were looking over at their person to get those cues.
Yeah, I felt like it was a lot of Marc hitting. But even still, the early scenes where we learn about Virgil and his ability to be communicative with sign language with Helen Hunt in her language lab. There were some scenes of them in the same space. So I did find that rather interesting because Willie, who played Virgil, would play off of what Helen Hunt was doing, which is pretty complex. So they're looking over at their handlers a lot when it's just them on the screen. They're not looking at anybody else. It's just their handlers and their trainers. But when it was just the two of them, I was like, well, they had to teach Helen Hunt what to do, and then teach Willie to play off of what Helen Hunt was doing, which, that takes a lot.
Yeah. And I think I'd be interested to hear the actors, the human actors now, to hear what they did and how much time they spent with Willie and the, maybe a couple of the other chimps. I think there were like 5 altogether.
Yeah.
But to develop a relationship and, how much time they spent interacting and with, and then with cameras rolling, how much time it took to get those couple 10-second scenes where they're interacting with each other and helping each other out and doing things together. Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of, I thought they edited it fairly well. But clearly, it takes a lot to get the apes actually communicating with sign and being referential like that. But they, for a movie, they did what they could. It's not entirely accurate, of course, but
right. It comes across to me as seamless enough that if you weren't a psychologist, and I think that's the point here, that if you're not a psychologist and you're not steeped within animal cognition or even sign language or anything like that, maybe you don't even know who Coco the gorilla is or was, that it should look like Virgil, the character, is communicating via sign language.
Right.
Rudimentarily, but, communicating that way. So what I want to do first is talk about like the first part of the movie, because it seemingly plays a little bit like two different films in the beginning of the movie, and we'll call that the first 15 minutes or so, and then the rest of the movie is Helen Hunt as a graduate student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison doing these ape language. And so as somebody with experience in this animal cognition situation, if you want to give us a little bit of background on how that kind of process works, what are the things that go into it, what are the ideas surrounding specifically like ape cognition, so on and so forth.
Yeah. So yeah, there was a lot going on at that time. There were, a number of these animal language projects, mostly with chimpanzees. Also, as you mentioned, Coco the gorilla, Alex the parrot. And they took different approaches at the time because everybody was trying to figure out what's the best way to communicate with apes. I'll focus on the ape work and the chimpanzee work in particular. So sign language, of course, was a prominent type of communication because American Sign Language already existed. It was a language system that could be used and adapted. Vocal, there were some early vocal attempts, but chimps don't have the same vocal apparatus that we do, and they don't have the same air control. So that kind of got ruled out pretty quickly. So there were several sign language projects, and those met with mixed success.
Okay.
And I won't go into all the critiques right now. Some of the critiques were that, apes were just being repetitive, that it's hard to know, with ape hands, if they put their hand up towards their mouth, that can be a number of different signs.
Sure.
Right. There's often not a lot of precision there, that maybe we have a little more dexterity and to distinguish between the sign for food and the sign for flower, for example.
Right.
And so it leaves a lot open to interpretation of what's being signed and what's not. And some of those projects, too, were critiqued because they didn't have a stable base of caregivers. They would have people just, a number of different graduate students sort of playing that Helen Hunt role, where they'd come in for a couple hours, try to operantly condition the chimp to sign and then leave. And that didn't seem to work much at all.
Right.
And opened itself to a lot of the critiques I just mentioned.
Yeah.
So, of course, I'm a little biased because our project used a different approach. We had a stable group of caregivers. We were with them when they were little 24/7 to develop those relationships. We used the touch symbols. So this was the Kanzi project that some of your listeners may be familiar with. We used touch symbols so that it was clear what they were touching, because often this was the early days where you could have electronic keyboards that gave you audio feedback with the word.
Yeah.
So you could tell what it was and it would register on the computer, for example. And we also raised the bonobos and chimps from early age, rather than starting when they were 4 or 5 years old. And that made a difference too, because, their plasticity when they're very young.
Right. Yeah.
So I think our project the Rumbaugh's project, kind of moved the needle a little further along than any of the other projects. I'm biased, but the apes that we raised clearly had understood English vocabulary, receptive words, demonstrated that under test conditions. They used about anywhere from 100 to a couple hundred symbols. The bonobos did better than the chimpanzee.
Okay. I've heard that.
Yeah. They have a little more flexibility and just was a little bit easier. It's like they were A students and the chimpanzee were C students in some ways. But anyway, but a lot of people are a little bit threatened, that apes can do stuff like that. And that's kind of one of the things with the cognitive revolution of ape cognition. It threatens our feeling of being special as humans. What is it that makes us human that's special and different from other related species? Which has
always been a fascinating question for me, because I don't know. I mean, other than language, I don't know what. And honestly, it's a biased lens from which we look at language here, because other animals have an amazing set of language and communication skills. Like I'll just marine mammals, for example, whales and dolphins. So it's always been an interesting philosophical question for me. It's like, why do we need to find the special,
right? Just
the special piece, the special sauce of humanity. I mean, yeah, we've created technology. I was thinking about this. This is one of my shower thoughts. I think it was yesterday or the day before. I thought to myself, man, if we're trying to find out what makes humans so special, it's probably because we make our own problems and then we refuse to solve them.
That could be it.
I mean, it's probably one of them, because I imagine some animals could make their own problems. Maybe dogs or cats make their own problems, but at least they attempt to solve them.
Right. Yeah, it's our belief in conspiracies and the things that we do. Yeah, that's probably as good an answer as any. But I think, getting back to the language and the specialness of language, I think that ties in with the music, right? Because as soon as Matthew Broderick saw that Virgil, who is Willie's character, was communicating via sign, and I'm not going to get into whether that's true language or not, right? There's language and communication, and we could go on I could talk about that for a long time. But as soon as he sees that kind of symbolic communication that they're trying to portray there, his view changes, right? And suddenly, and that, to him, that makes the animals that much closer to humanity.
And the second clip that I wanted to share with you all for this subdiscipline of psychology is a more recent episode. Episode 92, Dr. Jill Swirsky joined me to discuss her joy of musicals and child development in The Sound of Music. We explored the Von Trapp children and their development. Let's jump right into the developmental part of this. I just mentioned showing kids this because of the Von Trapp kids. So there are 7 Von Trapp children. 2 of them are boys, Kurt and Friedrich. Kurt is the younger boy at 11. Friedrich is 14. And then there are 5 girls. Louisa is 13. Then we've got Gretel, who's 5. Marta is 7. I'm going out of order, and I feel so bad because I was told by Georg to make sure I was in order. Brigitte is 10 and Liesel is 16. There we go. I got them. Yep. I got them all. Oh boy. So as a developmental psychologist by training and being steeped within that world, Jill, what could you tell us about how the film represents classic concepts in developmental psych?
Yeah, and this is one of the things when I really step back to think about, when you asked me the question, why this musical, why does it speak to you? That was one of the things that I thought of. I tend to gravitate right towards the developmental aspects because that's my training. Yeah. That's what I tend to fall back on. And so we can look at childhood, right? Gretel, who's 5, Marta, who's 7, Brigitte, who's 10, all fall into the developmental stage of childhood. And we see this in their behaviors in ways that really hold up over time, which is also fascinating. This movie's from I believe it was filmed in 1965. So these behaviors hold up over time, which kind of makes sense. Childhood, the fundamental pieces don't change much. For example, when Gretel first meets Maria, so we have this scene where Maria has just gotten to the Von Trapp home. The captain has blown his whistle to summon the children. They all kind of march down the stairs and fall into line, and he asks the children to introduce themselves. And each child steps forth with military precision and spouts off their name and their age. And you just see little Gretel step forward and step back. She doesn't actually say her age, even though she knows it, right? She knows how old she is. And the captain steps in, as parents often do for their children, and she's 5.
Oh, yeah, right.
This is common among kids. How many of us have seen a small child who knows the answer, right? Is developmentally, cognitively, they know the answer, but then get frightened. And this is especially true if we think about temperament, with a slow to warm up temperament. And so maybe we could characterize Gretel as having that sort of slow to warm up temperament.
Yeah, or some shyness.
Yep. Initially, it wears off very quickly.
Absolutely. As soon as she's like, I like this Maria gal.
Yes, which is often also very common with children, right? They may be shy at first, and as soon as they decide, hey, this person's okay, you're their new best friend.
And one last note about Jill. She's going to join me later this year to talk about Wicked in advance of Wicked for Good coming out to theaters. So look forward to that if you are also a fan of musicals and child development, or, just human development, I suppose. Okay, so this is a big subdiscipline coming up. We're going to talk about industrial organizational psychology for a second. And one of the mission statements of this show that you may have heard in my intro, or if you listened to the poor audio of the 000 episode, is that many of the shows that exist in the film or TV or, the media, AV media realm and psychology that blend, much of it is related to psychopathology and mental disorders of characters in these films and how they're portrayed. And I think that's great. Don't get me wrong, I think that's great. But I think there, as you have already seen and we'll hear about in this next segment, is there's a lot more psychology that you can explore in other movies. It does not have to just be mental disorders and psychopathology, which I agree with. And that is the difference. That is the reason for the existence of this show, right? And one of the things that I wanted to feature on this show was sort of the redheaded stepchild subdiscipline of psychology that gets very little love outside of, applied courses or applied programs is IO. IO doesn't get a lot of love in intro psych, and in many cases is ignored. And there are quite a few psychologists who teach at the undergraduate level that really want other instructors to incorporate it. There's a whole movement associated with incorporating IO as like a final chapter that you could kind of squeeze in at the end of the year with resources to do that. So I recommend doing that, exploring that if you want to, if you need to. But I have a couple of clips that I wanted to feature in this because they are some of the best episodes on this show. The first one is my conversation with my friend Dr. Ed Hansen, who just chats movies with me all the time, and it's a glorious, glorious friendship. He joined me for the first time to talk about Office Space, one of my favorite comedies of all time. And in this clip, we are chatting about organizational citizenship behaviors, or OCBs, that are in the film. And I think you'll enjoy it. Listen to the whole thing because Ed is amazing.
And one of the things that it always reminded me of from an IO perspective is that in any job, there are these extra things that you are supposed to do, not for yourself, but for the benefit of the company.
Yes.
And these are called organizational citizenship behaviors, OCBs.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a variety of different categories of different OCBs, but women in particular are punished for not doing OCBs. It's kind of the expectation that they're going to be a more helpful coworker, that they're going to be a more courteous coworker, a more thoughtful coworker. Whereas if men do these more communal OCBs, it's like, wow, look at Alex. Isn't that so nice how he's always willing to help? If someone needs a substitute teacher, he jumps right in there. That's so nice of him. He's so nice.
Yeah.
And if a woman is nice, they're like, yeah, I appreciate her niceness, but it's almost a given that it's the expectation.
Yeah.
And it's this double standard that they are held to much different standards. And here you also have someone that's going above and beyond in some ways. We don't really know if she's a good waitress or not. They don't really get into that. But he does tell her that she should smile more.
Mm-hmm.
And now there's a lot of loaded language whenever a man tells a woman to smile more.
Of course.
But emotional labor for people in the service industry, whether it is customer service at an airport or in a restaurant or talking to your cable representatives, whoever, emotional labor, you got to fake it till you make it. And that takes its toll. And the boss says, They come here for the atmosphere and the attitude. And just by that statement, I was like, neither of these seem very good at tchotchkes. This is a toxic work environment. I don't want an overpriced burger at a place with a bad attitude and a bad atmosphere, but that seems like, at least from the waitstaff's perspective, exactly what tchotchkes is. And I think, again, students would really resonate with this part of the movie just because, sad but true, they have a lot of examples of poor work environments in the restaurant industry. It's a tough business, but it's also one, he's saying to her, you want to be the kind of person who does the minimum. How much you want to bet that she makes the minimum? Right?
She probably makes less than minimum.
Less than the minimum because she's on tips.
Probably.
Right? So she is making less than minimum wage and being asked to put out this maximal effort and to express herself through flair. And so, boy, it's just really bad there, Alex.
Yeah, I can dig that. I luckily never had a work environment like that. Even McDonald's, because really everyone was doing their minimum there.
Fair enough. Yeah, I always feel a little guilty when we talk about our work horror stories because I've never had a quote unquote bad boss. That would be an interesting one. Bad bosses would be an interesting one to sort of unpack for horrible bosses, right?
Yes, horrible bosses and horrible bosses too.
But no, I've never had the boss that I really didn't like going to work for. Probably the closest I ever had was just a boss I didn't really see very much, which is not better. But we just kind of slacked off anyway. And like you say, this is not a situation where we were highly intrinsically motivated to do a great job at our summer jobs while we were college students.
True. And I wanted to add to your description of OCBs. It's more of a comment than a question. I think I could have guessed if you had said to me, which gender do you think bears the brunt of the OCBs? I think I would have been very quick to say women in this case, and that differential kind of behavior that you got there, because it is completely unsurprising to me, but also very appalling.
Well, sure. You look in even forward-thinking academic departments, for example, women faculty members are consistently on more committees than male faculty members. And this would be an example of the OCB civic virtue, right? Nobody wants to be on more committees. Nobody wants to be on more, sometimes we have the ones that are near and dear and close to our hearts, right. But otherwise there are some of these things that we're going on them because, well, someone needs to go on them and I guess I'll do it. And unfortunately, women just fall on that sword more often than not.
Right.
And they're not always going to be rewarded for it either. While we're on it, the other two are conscientiousness and sportsmanship.
Okay.
Conscientiousness is, of the big five, really the one that Iowa psychologists spend the most time thinking about.
Okay.
It's definitely going to be the gold standard. Like if you want to look, it predicts so many positive things for like academic success, but it's also going to predict a lot of positive outcomes for success in the workplace, missing less work, getting things in a timely fashion. If you're hiring conscientious workers, you're already ahead of the rest of the field. So it's definitely the gold standard from the big five. And then sportsmanship is just kind of like, it's a little harder to pin down, but it's not gossiping about people in the workplace.
Okay.
If you get a raise, not to say, hey, did you get a raise too? I got a raise. I feel pretty good about it. And so you can tell your significant other, you can tell your mom, they want to hear about those things, but your coworkers, that's not the place to be talking about those kinds of things.
Now, does that, you said it was hard to define, but the question that just popped in my head is that what about other successes? So successes that are personal, right? So not company successes, but successes that are personal, that don't have this the same sort of connotation as, oh, I got a raise. Did you get a raise?
Yeah, I think that isn't necessarily going to be a negative component of sportsmanship, right? I mean, some cultures are definitely more open to like talking about our families and talking about our personal lives at work. And it's definitely, some people think that's really inappropriate is the honest answer, right? Some people think it's like, why does Alex always talk about his kids in class? Why does Ed always talk about his kids in class? I've had, this said in a student evaluation, for example, right? And so sharing your successes or those kinds of things, some people will find it more acceptable or more offensive than others, but I think it really has more to do with those like work salient things.
Okay.
So it's like, I just got I just got a compliment from the boss who never gives compliments, or I'm going to just sort of make other people feel bad about the way that things are going for them. Or if downsizing, if everyone knows that it's happening, that's definitely an element of this film, is like sometimes you do know that one of your colleagues is unlikely to make it through this downsizing process. And so how do you manage that? I think that's more of a reflection of the OCB of sportsmanship, probably.
Okay. I like that. Yeah. For the whole, this is not downsizing, but it is downsizing sort of.
So, for
vibe.
example, not telling Milton that he's no longer on payroll would be bad sportsmanship.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And in this next segment, Nick Baldwin joined me. Nick has been on a few episodes to talk about various IO things. He recently moved from teaching at the undergraduate level in the Chicago area to working with the United States Air Force. So kudos to him. But before he did that, he joined me in episode 59 to talk about the opposite of OCBs, CWBs, which are counterproductive work behaviors in the film Clerks. On the topic of CWBs, let's pivot to Randall. We've spent a lot of time talking about Dante is the main character, but let's talk about Randall because Jeff Anderson plays the best slacker that I've seen in a movie in a long time. Even rewatching it, having it be fresh in my mind with other slackers of the past. I think Randall is one of the top ones, and he does have a job, so maybe that puts him out of the running as a true slacker. But what are his CWBs as, at least the movie Clerk?
Sure. So, I mean, I think already talked about him showing up late, like right off the bat.
So good.
Literally, his character is pretty much top to bottom CWBs. He... At some point, a customer is complaining to him for his behavior, and his response to that customer is to tear up their membership card, basically saying, get out of here because I'm not dealing with any complaints. Both of them are almost never actually in the store, even on times when they've got it set up.
Mm-hmm.
Randall is also, through this movie, and this is one of the things that feels a little weird at times and certainly dated, is saying absolutely inappropriate things on a regular basis, if not to the customers, then at the very least in their proximity.
And
you know what I mean?
Within earshot. Yeah.
Yeah.
The ordering of several pornography videos in front of the mother and her young daughter. Yeah, it's rough. It's rough.
Yeah,
rough.
and just not caring. And that he's like, you can tell from the way the character is written and played that he's also kind of doing this out of spite some of those times, including later on. Not only does he order the videos and say the names in front of them, but later when he's like watching the store for Dante, he's got a TV where he's got porn on the TV for like anyone who walked into the store, it would be there, so like there's layers to that of like, arguably time theft, but also just inappropriate behavior, misconduct around customers, all kinds of things. And then, yeah, so those are the ones that I have specifically for Randall as the big ones. I've got a couple of others from others, but yeah, I mean, it's pick a scene that Randall's in and you're probably viewing some CWB.
Isn't that wild though? Like, just like pick any scene and bam, he's doing a CWB. I mean, if that's not the most 90s character, especially from some counterculture guy like Kevin Smith, especially in the 90s and early 2000s, of just trying to be as profane. And I mean, I remember Jay and Silent Bob. Let's go back to this movie. I was telling Nick earlier, like constantly go back to this movie. But Jay and Silent Bob, like constant F word. And like in 2003, that was a pretty raunchy movie. Of course, raunchier movies have come out since then, but that was pretty wild. And
you would not have your hangovers and your bridesmaids, I don't think, if you didn't have Jay and Silent Bob's and Randall saying some of the crass stuff that they say in this movie.
Moving on to clinical psychology and maybe a little bit of psychopathology. Actually, I don't know if I did a very good job of representing the psychopathology that we've had on the show, but I wanted to highlight guests that have been on the show, who have joined me to talk about these sorts of things. And I realized that most of my like psychopathology episodes have just been solo once. So, oh well. But I wanted to feature, and I didn't really know where to put these. Well, I guess I could have put this in the neuroscience category. But the first clip that we're going to play is Dr. Sarah Bagley joined me in episode 33 to talk about the wonderful film featuring Robin Williams and Robert De Niro, Awakenings. And in this clip, we talk about the history of L-DOPA as a treatment for various neurological conditions, and then the portrayal of the experimentation done by Robin Williams' character in the film. What I want to do with this next segment, Sarah, is I want to talk about this L-DOPA, which is the main sort of driver of the story and the plot of the movie, and really has a lot for, your psychophys classes or your behavioral neuro classes, and that is this L-DOPA thing. So if you could, as the behavioral neuroscientists on the call here, could you tell us what L-DOPA is, what dopamine is, and what you mentioned earlier, the basal ganglia? What's that?
Okay. So, for all of you naive scientists out there or neuroscientists out there, let's start with the brain, right? That's where it all starts. It's that lumpy connected tissue inside your skull, and your brain and your spinal cord are connected through neural communication. And sitting right, if you were to take your hand and hold a fist, imagine your arm attached is your spinal cord, and then it comes just at the base of your neck would be your wrist, and then it bulges out. Now, this would be your hindbrain or brain stem. And if you put your other hand right over top of your fist, that's going to be your cortical area surrounding your brain stem. So now you all have kind of a visual representation or a tactile representation of what your brain is. And all of your sensory information is bringing information in through your brain stem, through your spinal cord up to your brain stem, usually out into the cortical areas. If you need some sort of movement to occur with your body, your cortical areas will tell your brainstem to send information down the spinal cord and then tell your body to move those muscles.
Yeah.
All right. This does it kind of without fail. Our bodies are so well equipped to do this. The basal ganglia is a special region in the brain stem, so that kind of first fist I gave you, that helps us refine motor movements. And by refine, it's going to allow us to enhance our motor movements. So thinking about holding a bat to hit a ball, you are going to be able to hold the bat steady and swing at the appropriate time, given information coming in. It also, so it helps us initiate that movement to swing the bat at the right time, but it also helps us inhibit other motor movements so that we are specifically talking to only specific muscles to make that happen, and we're not swinging the bat all over the place. Okay. So the basal ganglia does two different functions. It initiates and it inhibits. And one of the main neurochemicals that we utilize specifically in this area is dopamine. And dopamine will work, depending on the pathway, to initiate movements or inhibit movements. And I'm just kind of talking about in the basal ganglia. Dopamine does a lot of things throughout the whole brain as well as throughout the whole body. You can do a quick search and learn that it's one of the neurochemicals that allows addiction to happen and is very, very highly tolerant and all this good stuff. So what we think was happening in these patients' brain with sleeping sickness is that there was a deficit in this dopamine where it's not allowing them to initiate motor movements. And you also see with some of the tics and the tremors in the early signs of these patients that they're not able to control the muscle groups that they want to control. And it's very, very similar to a Parkinson's type disease that has deficits in the basal ganglia with some dopaminergic functionality. So when Dr. Sayer, or Dr. Sachs in real life, goes to this conference and learns about L-DOPA, he thought, well, maybe this area of the brain, I don't know if they knew specifically this area or that it could be involved, if there's an agonist, meaning if there's a dopamine dysfunction where these neurons are either not producing enough or not able to receive dopamine, L-DOPA can work to provide more dopamine into that system, where then the system can maybe work more appropriately.
Yeah.
Okay? So in general, that's why that's what L-DOPA is. It's called an agonist of the dopamine system, and it will allow someone who maybe had either this executing muscle function issue or controlling or inhibiting these other muscle functions, all controlled by the brain. So it allows the sort of resetting of those abilities. So you see them awaken and be able to control their movements again.
Yeah, and I think what I'll add to that that was a great description, and a bunch of awesome. I think I'm gonna steal the baseball bat idea. That's a really good example. But I think it's also important to note that L-DOPA is not only a which is what they call in the movie is a synthetic drug, but it's also a precursor to a lot of other neurotransmitters in your brain, not only dopamine, but other what are called catecholamines, epinephrine, norepinephrine, or if for those of you who like to take the British idea and warp it into the media, the American media, then adrenaline. You can have adrenaline and noradrenaline. Yeah. Because we need multiple names for everything. That just makes sense. Just confuse people. Yeah, it's great. But anyways, I did want to mention that even though in the movie they characterize it as this synthetic material, that it is made by our body from amino acids. Right, you got to get that protein in your diet so you can make L-DOPA. Then you can make dopamine. This would be great. So the idea is that you flood the system with L-DOPA, and then that will get metabolized into. I guess maybe not metabolized is probably not the right word. Synthesized. Yeah, there we go. Synthesized into dopamine for use by the other systems like the basal ganglia, as you said. And so in the movie, and there are parallels to what happened in real life, and then there are the fictionalized versions of this. So I have a rant, but before I get into the rant, I want Sarah to because I learned this TIL this stuff with Dr. Saxon, the actual things, because I have not read the book Awakenings. And so I did not know any of this. So Sarah, what actually happened? And then we'll talk about the portrayal.
So my research upon this is that they had originally received a 90-day trial and with permission, consent from the families, for a whole group of these patients to receive L-DOPA. And it was double blinded, meaning the doctors and the patients or caregivers who gave consent were not informed as to whether they were going to get L-DOPA or the placebo. So Dr. Sachs speaks about being able to infer with almost certainty each of the patients who received L-DOPA within a month or less. So this was supposed to go 90 days, 3 months-ish. At about a month or less, they completely stopped the trial and gave all patients L-DOPA without that 90-day limit. So they also believed that was going to be unfair to stop seeing this progression at 90 days. And I have a quote from Oliver Sacks in 1983. Thus, what was originally conceived as a 90-day experiment was transformed instead into a historical experience, which I think is an amazing way to perceive what you had just done with these patients. So he actually had a hard time getting his work published in traditional academic journals and reported feeling bewilderment, frustration, anger, despair because he wanted to disseminate this story. And how Dr. Saxon, if you've read any of his other works, Man Mistook His Wife for a Hat or Musicphilia or Hallucinations, they really are stories. and not peer-reviewed published articles with tables and charts. And no, he tells the story of these individuals. So he was finally able to get his work published with more essay form rather than scientific peer-reviewed. And that became his much preferred way to be a doctor treating patients rather than a scientist.
Right.
So I want to hear your rants about his non-scientific method.
I'm not going to rant about Dr. Sachs. What I am going to rant about is the portrayal of it in the movie, which not necessarily grinds my gears, but it's just like, oh man, I hope people don't believe that this is what, doctors were doing even in 1969, because they probably weren't. But in any case, that is not what happens in the movie. All of that history that Sarah just gave you listeners is not at all. Well, maybe there's a little bit, but nothing of that nature happens in the movie. Okay, so he goes, so Sayer, Robin Williams, goes to the conference and learns about L-Dopa. And he learns about L-Dopa based on apparently one person's work. You don't really see too much of any other kind of research. This guy played by Peter Stormare, which I thought was an interesting choice for like 2 minutes of screen time. He's not that collegial. He calls himself a chemist. You're the doctor. And I was like, whoa, you can still help him out. Like, don't have to be a jerk about it. And then he takes this single idea with no white paper. I know that would not be at all cinematic to write up, a précis on what L-Dopa could do. But he goes to the chief of medicine. He's like, hey, I found this drug idea. You've heard of L-Dopa, right? Because you're a physician. And the guy's like, yeah, I have, but you don't have a lot of evidence. And he's like, yeah, okay, but, it still might work. Chief of medicine's like, well, what do you want to do? Give it to all of them? Yeah. No. Some of them? No. One of them. I was like, okay, well, it's no longer an experiment anymore. It's a case study. Yeah. Okay, fine. Case studies are valid or fine. As long as, you document and do all your stuff. It's fine. Okay. And then he's like, I know exactly who I'm going to give it to.
Yeah.
Okay.
The one I think it's going
to work on. Talk about confirmation bias.
Which is exactly what a researcher should do.
Exactly. So, fast forward to him giving it to Leonard, and we see their titration attempts. So titration is starting somebody at a low dose and bringing them up incrementally to much higher doses, or you can also titrate downward, going from a high dose and bringing somebody down to a low dose. So it's just basically not giving somebody an entire bunch of toxic chemicals all at once. But the movie doesn't do a very good job of passing time. And so what ends up happening is you're like, all of this titration is happening over and over and over again. Sayer's going to the pharmacy and looking at a pharmacist or chemist or somebody, put 400 milligrams of L-Dopa into a drink. Doesn't seem to work with orange juice, but we don't know if it was the orange juice's fault or what. Right? We don't know if it was the citric acid inside the orange juice that inactivated it, or if it just was too low of a dose. It's confound there. But they switch it to milk. Great. Good job. You didn't really actually rule out the confound there. But okay, that's fine. Put it in milk. So they put it in milk, and then you see them over and over again increase it, and nothing's happening. So they're like, oh, nothing's happening. And what we know now, okay, again, as you've mentioned, Sarah, this is the 1960s. But, drug therapy wasn't necessarily like, we don't know what we're doing.
No, they knew what titration was.
They knew what they were doing. They knew how this would work. And I would imagine that with a couple of decades of psychotic medication work under their belts, they would realize that it does take a little bit longer for psychoactive substances to start working in a brain. And we know now, a physician will tell you, here's your SSRI. Hey, it's not going to work right away. It's probably going to take up to 4 weeks. Just give it a shot. Give it a chance, right? And so they're like, it's not, I'm tapping my watch here. It's not going fast enough. And so, in the evening, when it seems like he was not supposed to do this, because the pharmacist was like, hey, bro, don't touch my stuff. And he goes into the pharmacy, pulls out the L-Dopa, puts a freaking gram of L-Dopa into some milk and gives it to Leonard. Dude was juiced up on L-Dopa. No wonder he got up.
No wonder. He's wired.
He is
for the day.
wired. And the crazy thing about it was that completely was forgotten. It was ignored. He never said anything like, "Hey, should we give these people this amount?" No, it's more like a gram.
No.
It's more like a gram per dose. Wait, how do you gram? Last time we did it was 500 milligrams. Don't worry about it. It's just a gram.
Don't worry about it.
Just thinking that we should double the dose. And it is completely ignored swept under the rug. It worked. But you're at a friggin' hospital, man. Come on. You are a doctor. And then in the second segment here, I wanted to be a little goofy, I suppose, with psychopathology. And instead of picking schizophrenia or dissociative identity disorder, why not addiction? Because this was a great conversation that I had with Dr. Melissa Maffeo more recently in episode 78 for the film Requiem for a Dream. And in this clip, Melissa does a phenomenal job in, a handful of minutes describing addiction models in psychology and related subdomains. It's wonderful. So, Melissa, for us, for me and the listeners, could you explain for, let's say at an undergraduate level, how this movie shows addiction? What are the features of addiction that we're looking for when we watch this movie? And what are some of the models that psychologists use to describe?
So I think I would define addiction as a compulsive behavior to take in a substance, usually taking in higher quantities than originally intended.
Okay.
Eventually, for most drugs of abuse, developing some kind of tolerance where you have to take more to get the same effect. And what happens with addiction is when people start off taking a drug, and we see this in the beginning of the movie, it's fun, it's pleasant, it's euphoric, it's you get high, and people feel good. And in the literature, that's referred to as liking. So that's kind of the hedonic pleasure that people get from using drugs of abuse. But then once that tolerance and dependence starts building up and this drug-seeking behavior kind of really takes off, that's when the person transitions into what we call wanting. And that's the wanting stage is more like the motivation to take the drug. So what are you willing to give up so that you can get more of the drug? And we clearly see all of these characters making some really huge sacrifices so that they can have more access to drugs.
Yeah, that's very true. All four of them. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and the way people have thought about addiction and drug use over the decades has certainly changed and evolved as we learn more about the brain and behavior. And originally, drugs were legal, for a very long time. That's why Coca-Cola has its name, right?
Right, exactly. Yep.
I always tell my students they replace the cocaine in Coca-Cola with caffeine. There was a period of there was a period of time where everyone was doing drugs.
Yeah.
But then just because of political, racial stigmas, certain drugs started being seen as more bad.
Yeah.
And then people really started pushing this moral model of addiction, which is like, if you take drugs, you have a weak moral character. You're not a good person. Don't hang out with those people. You don't want to be like those bad kids that do the drugs.
Yeah.
And that, that kind of stinks. And unfortunately, a lot of people today still have that mindset. It stinks because it puts a lot of blame on the addict. And it also, de-incentivizes people to want to help them and support them.
Right.
And we see a lot of that actually in this movie. Towards the end of the movie when Marlon is in Tyrone, that was Marlon was the actor.
Yeah.
When Tyrone was arrested, he's getting a ton of just like verbal abuse from the officers related to how he's an addict and everything. They treat him terribly.
Yep.
So people moved on from the moral model, and the disease model kind of emerged out of that. And so the disease model is really this idea that addiction is like a disease. It is essentially a disease. There's something, it's not the addict's fault that they take the drug. It is compulsive. It's something that they don't have a lot of control over, or really any control over.
Okay.
And that's really good because it takes the blame away from the addict. It makes people be like, oh, we can fix this, and we can. And I think the issue with the disease, and there's really no issue with it, it's just that it's overly simplistic. We've now that we know so much more about psychology, we can kind of add a little bit more. It's not just because there's something different in your brain. That's not the only reason someone would choose to use a drug, right?
Yeah.
But it's good. It's more of a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
People started thinking about the physical dependence model of addiction. And this is true. And what the physical dependence model says is that people use the drug to avoid having these negative withdrawal phases, which is absolutely true. You know, when someone becomes addicted to a drug, they go through withdrawal. Withdrawal can be incredibly painful, especially opiate withdrawal. The only way to get out of it is to take more of that drug. But then it perpetuates that cycle of building up more tolerance and then having an even worse withdrawal. And that's okay. And all of that is absolutely true, except that the physical dependence model doesn't explain why someone might relapse years after they've been clean, because they're not physically dependent on that drug anymore. So there's clearly just more to it.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think in my world, most psychologists really ascribe to this positive reinforcement model.
Okay.
So positive reinforcement is when someone does a behavior, that behavior has some kind of reward attached to it. And so the reinforcer is going to increase the likelihood that that behavior happens again.
Right.
So in the simplest form, drugs feel good. So when a person does a drug, that drug is the reinforcer. So they're more likely to do the drug again. Part of the problem with this is that these drugs are powerful, powerful reinforcers.
Absolutely.
And then people start attaching meaning to other things in their environment that reminds them of the drug. So the people that you're with, the music you listen to, the place you go, all of those things are going to be cues for making you crave the drug a little bit more. And then the drug itself obviously is changing chemistry inside the brain.
Right.
And it's specifically working inside these motivation reward centers, movement centers of the brain to kind of make your brain focused on doing that compulsive behavior, which is more drug use.
That was excellent. That was an excellent recap in what I would say was probably the quickest addiction class one could take. Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. The rest of the conversation is absolutely great. And Melissa joined me again more recently. We talked about 50 First Dates, the lovely memory-based one with Drew Barrymore and Adam Sandler. You should listen to that one too. Next up, we have an interesting category, one that I did not think would be on this show, but here we are. Research methods and stats. I was just having a conversation with some friends about how important research methods and stats are to a psychology degree, and everyone should be comfortable in exploring this. So I've got two clips, research methods and stats. I've got one stats, one research methods. Of course I do. More to come on that, by the way, more to come on that. But in this first clip, Dr. Jess Hartnett joined me in episode 60 to talk about sabermetrics and baseball statistics that appeared in the film Moneyball. And here Jess is talking about how statistics were used to place people in positions, prompt people, player purchases, trades, etc. All of this, right? So statistics being the driving force instead of gut instincts or intuition. We've got Peter doing the data part, and this leads to strife in the clubhouse. I want to talk about the on-field manager in just a second because played by the amazing Philip Seymour Hoffman. But he comes and butts heads with this, I guess, head scout. I barely caught the name, and I don't know if I caught a title that he had, but he seemed like the head scout, and he was like, "We've been doing this for years, Billy, and you're trying to do this statistics thing. That's not how baseball works." And it ends up getting fired. It gets his words thrown back in his face, which I think is a good movie comeuppance. But Jess, I'm curious if you've heard about the new rules that are going to be put into place. So bases are getting bigger for one thing, right?
Yep.
And so I'm curious how this conversation now shifts because the rules are changing significantly toward offensive play rather than defensive play.
Right. And you have baseball players, even 22-year-olds who've been playing the game for 10, 15 years with these different rules that require a different kind of play. I mean, well, it kind of makes me think on-base percentage became this big new let's just call it an outcome variable, right? This is
Sure.
that which we need. And it wasn't always an outcome variable. It's sometimes more of an IV, right? To see who to pick up. And
Right.
then it was this great advantage for the A's until everyone started doing it, right?
Exactly.
And once everyone started doing it, it wasn't such an advantage, and everyone had their eyes on the diamonds in the rough, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now what's going to happen? Because so it's all data, right? And this makes me think of like data in real life, where there's so much data that you're sitting on that your organization has, right?
Mm-hmm.
And no one's found the right like pattern in there, right? You know, they need to do the correlation, they need to do the AI in order to figure out, well, does this mean people that steal bases all the time, is that all you should recruit now? Or what's the other rule, that you can't move around the outfield based on different players?
Yeah, you can't do big shifts. So the infield players can't stack on one side of second base anymore.
Right. So does that mean if you have like a totally erratic hitting style that is not like the norm, like does that mean that people are going to position their outfield at like the modal spot in order to perform best? And if you are a hitter who can't be predicted, I mean, that would already be an advantage, but it would be an even larger. It's just going to be interesting to me that Sabermetrics is going to get thrown on its ear.
Yes, and my point of bringing up the new rules to all of the baseball fans that listen to this podcast, to bring up the new rules, it goes back to what those old timers of baseball were saying, is that we've been doing this a long time and we're focusing on the big hitters, the spectacle, and we're kind of back to the spectacle, right? We've had this run of great data and great data usage to get teams to where they need to be. Billy Beane had the Red Sox. I don't want to say he took them, but he got the Red Sox to within 2 years a World Series after not winning it since 1918. So, I mean, it was a successful strategy, but as you said, everyone started using it, and now we're back to the big spectacle and looking for those intangibles because we measure everything now. You watched baseball at several points last season, correct? Yeah. They've got stats for everything, and now we have like AWS, Amazon Web Services, just giving you every bit. And so I feel like baseball has now reached a point of data saturation.
Well, and it even makes me think too, with like they're going to start like getting rid of refs, like they're going to let computers make the calls because we can train them. Like the training can happen. So if we can train like all of these hits, and that's another thing that I thought was interesting with Moneyball, how they're able to figure out like for each individual player, like you don't hit it when it's in the bottom right of the square. Like this is what you mess up on. And I can show you like it's a 37% versus a 50%. And we were talking before the audio went on that's like success for a statistician or for a social scientist, right?
Yep.
Like if you can find out the small portion of some variance, and if you can explain that, that's pretty exciting in the social sciences, especially depending on the sort of question you're asking. But they didn't care. Like, and it was just interesting that was actually well received by the players. And I don't know how fictionalized that is, but if like, let's just call him Peter Brandt, nerd boy, Mr. Yaley, Mr. Spreadsheet. Like they had him having like these level conversations with players where he was saying like, this is where you're awesome and this is what you need to work on. And he could like literally just show, here's the math. This is not my intuition. This isn't me as a Yaley telling you, a professional athlete, what to do. I'm just saying that this is the pattern. What do we learn from the pattern?
I wonder if, and I don't really know any baseball players. Even I know some baseball players, obviously, of my students, but I don't really have baseball conversations with them. And I wonder how many of them inherently accept the idea of statistics driving their playing and practicing and whatnot, and they're, I guess, theorizing about the game and how to be better, because one of the main stats is batting average,
right?
And it tells tells the player how often they will likely hit a ball somewhere, right? So I wonder if they have that to use intuition here, intuitive sense or fondness for data.
So anecdotally, I was talking to baseball players about that, and and it came up in Motivation and Motion where my student athletes talk about goal setting with their coaches.
Mm-hmm.
And goal, I don't mean like goal. I mean
Yeah.
like, just to be clear, I don't. I'm like too many mixed sports metaphors, right?
Great. It would have been fine if you were mixing sports metaphors.
My
But
bad.
yes.
My bad. But he was saying that like he had sat down with his coach, and like the coach wanted to set goals with everyone, and he was able to say like, and in some ways, like it must be so hard to be a student athlete and to feel like you're being criticized. But if like data is being used to criticize you, I wonder if that's easier to take.
And then last year, Dr. Jordan Wagge joined me in my basement, which is rare. I've only had 3 if you count the year retrospective that I did after the first year of the show with my wife, Astrid. So there have only been 3 episodes where I've had in-person conversations. A conversation with Jason Spiegelman, where we were in a hotel room on Pulp Fiction, and then this lovely conversation with Jordan on the film Groundhog Day in episode 83. This is a fascinating analysis by Jordan on how Bill Murray's character just goes through many, many thousands of days of hypothesis testing. It's great. It's a great example of inductive reasoning and hypothesis testing and the things that we learn from doing repeated things and getting those observations over and over again. I love it. I was enamored, and you'll note that it actually doesn't happen until the last third of the episode. Like it's one of our final discussions. And here's a clip of that discussion for you. So Jordan, I want to hear about your research methods, ideas, because this is, once you mentioned this to me a couple of days ago, this is all I've been thinking about.
All you've been thinking about.
All I've been thinking about. Because it's a new angle,
yeah,
for sure. Because in the learning class, we talk about research methods, of course, because not only are they kind of different from the ones you talk about in research methods and stats in like kind of like the technical language associated with them, like A/B trialing and all that kind of stuff. So we still do talk about research methods in that class, so I can incorporate this into our discussion.
Oh, for sure. I think there's enough there that I would actually play this in a research methods class. So,
that's them fighting words, because I don't.
Okay, so
I'd like to this.
I'll try to go with
on the clock now.
I'll try to go with top 5 concepts. So just the concept of experimentation in here is really interesting. Like hold all other variables constant while you change one variable to see what happens. You see a lot of this at the very beginning, right? And he doesn't have any choice except to hold all other variables constant and change one variable. So you see him kind of messing around with like, well, what happens if I do this? What happens if I do that? So just that logic of experimentation, the logic of hypothesis testing, of like, when he sits next to Nancy Taylor in the restaurant and he's like, okay, like what high school did you go to? Who was your English teacher? He's forming a hypothesis. Like he has like a theory-based hypothesis. He's like, okay, if I can like connect with this woman and I can make her think that we went to high school together, and that we have a shared history. If I can do that, then then I'm in, right?
I can get her into bed. Yeah.
Yeah. And then he tests the hypothesis. So there are lots of great examples of hypothesis. The hypothesis that the groundhog is the one.
Oh, yes. The one that we mentioned a little while ago. Yeah.
Yeah. And so he drives off a cliff with the groundhog and he wakes up again the next day. His hypothesis, he has to, he's not supported. So I think those are good examples of that. I love the example of the snowball fight, right? Because the very first snowball fight was authentic. It kind of led to a really nice moment between Phil and Rita, which led to like another nice moment, blah, blah, blah. And then that moment got ruined, right? And then I don't remember if it was the very next scene. I think it was like a few nights later. You saw him kind of like trying to recreate the whole thing, but being really sloppy about it. Just being like, yeah, kids, like little urchins. Are you up for adoption? Ha, ha, ha. And he's just going through the motions, but he's not really doing his replication has low fidelity to the original, right? And some of it, I think it's a really neat example of like, there are all of these like hidden moderators, like the element of surprise. You can't recapture that. He like lays down in the ground next to her and like tries to position himself. It's really awkward and forced. And like, you can tell, this is such good acting. Like you can really tell that he's up to something kind of funny. And obviously she can tell.
Yeah.
So it's like, bad replication, if you don't adhere to the methods of that very first, that very first evening, which you're not going to be able to recreate. Like there's no such thing as direct replication, right? Because you can never do the exact same thing the exact same way. That would be the closest anybody could get, but because he has memories of the preceding evening, they're interfering with the way he acts in following evenings. And so I think that's a really good example of like, you just can't have direct replication. And
I think it's also a great example of questionable research practice, because he's
p-hacking his way through that. Yeah.
He's absolutely p-hacking his way for the maximum likelihood of response.
Yes. Yeah. He's just like, this line worked last night.
Yeah.
I'm not really into it because my ultimate goal is not enjoying this evening with Rita. My ultimate goal is, rejecting that null.
Yes. That is a new way to refer to sex. I love it.
Yeah.
Rejecting the null.
I bet the kids will like it.
Yeah. College kids.
Not like my kids.
Right.
No. Yeah. I'm not going to go upstairs and wake them up. Be like,
hey guys, I've got a new euphemism for you.
Yeah. They'll be like, hey, yo.
Hey, yo. That's sussy.
That's us. This is how our kids have been talking to each other.
Yeah. For the last couple of days.
Skibbity.
Oh, goodness.
It's so bad.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. There, I think, are some good examples of confidence intervals, like right at the beginning. Like as you get more data, your estimations get more precise.
Mm-hmm.
I love that example at the beginning where she asks him if he's leaving that day. And the first day he says, I'd say there's 100% chance. But then this is actually probably a good example of adjusting your priors.
I thought we weren't doing Bayesian.
I don't want to, and I don't know that I understand it, but but because he's having this weird experience, it's only his second Groundhog Day. He's like, I'd say the chance of departure is 80%. Like he's like, I don't know what's going on here, but I'm still going to try to leave.
Right.
But like something weird is happening. So like maybe it's not as likely. So I think that's a really good example of that. And I mean, I could probably go through like controlling variables, mediating variables, confounds are all good examples that are in here. He's collecting data.
Mm-hmm.
That this is just something he's naturally doing, is like he's like collecting like what happens if I do this, what happens if I do that. If he's writing anything down, who knows? I think at the beginning he's sleazy enough that he probably is writing some of this stuff down. Well, because he couldn't.
It doesn't matter if he writes stuff down.
Yeah, but that's true. Oof.
Because
what if he tattooed it on his chest? Is that a different
Memento?
Movie? Yeah.
Yeah. I think the tattoos wouldn't be there.
They would fade. Yeah.
They would disappear.
Yeah.
Because if killing himself doesn't work, then getting a tattoo.
Yeah.
Because he also like gets into car accidents and gets into fights. It's implied that he gets into fights and stuff, and so he's obviously harming himself significantly on some days, ultimately on others. So nothing sticks.
Yeah.
So he can't bring anything with him except his memories.
But he's still collecting. This is an even better example because it's like, this is how we work in everyday life. This is how our brains work. We're always collecting data and we don't always write it down. And so all we have to rely on is our memory.
And we still come to conclusions. Like this is still inductive. It's a great example of inductive reasoning, which is the primary driver of scientific inquiry. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I love it. It's
so many layers.
Good. So many. Yeah. This is a research methods onion in this movie.
It really is.
I've been struggling to find movies for research methods. I don't know if I'm going to have time to ever incorporate a movie, but maybe suggest it as a way to kind of...
Oh, I mean, I think, Moneyball's an obvious one.
That's statistics, though. Research methods.
Ours are combined.
Yeah, ours are combined, too. But I've been struggling to find a movie that really has a good embodiment of research methods.
We'll have to work on that a little. Like, we could do... Let me think about this a little bit more.
There's a paper in here. There is a Reader's Corner paper in this. The research methods of Bill Murray's Phil Connors and Groundhog Day.
Yeah.
A couple more segments left. But in this next segment, I thought it would be useful to explore the gender and human sexuality component to psychology. Now, gender studies and human sexuality doesn't necessarily live within psychology, and so I want to make that clear. But there, of course, are psychological aspects in gender and human sexuality. They usually find their way into biopsych. Sometimes there is a human sexuality class within a psychology program. So I thought, let's include this. So the first segment is a is an older episode, sort of midway through, about 3-4 years ago. Episode 45 with Dr. Molly Metz and Dr. Will Ryan. They joined me together to talk about But I'm a Cheerleader and conversion therapy. And in this early part of the episode, in this clip, you'll hear the reasons why we are still discussing conversion therapy as a discipline and as a society, because though it's satirical in the film, it's still a very real problem and issue in real life. And that's how we characterize our discussion that comes afterward in this clip.
I think the overarching idea about this film is its commentary on a really tough topic, a really heavy topic, and that is conversion therapy. Did you want to say something about conversion therapy for the listeners?
Yeah, just that, I'll go first and then Molly can give us a little bit more of the history about that. But just that, right? So this film is very light in its portrayal of a very heavy thing, and that it was intentional, right, by the director, was to show a fun, flourishing story of our community, but also cover a difficult topic. And so just we want to note that if this is something that hits close to home, because it does for many people, this is something that's still very much alive, even though this film was 23 years old now. This issue is not old. It's very much currently in the news, and so it's still affecting people's lives. And so if you're not ready to laugh along with us at this portrayal of it, not at the concept in general, but then maybe this isn't the episode for you. But
yeah, well said, Will.
And so because it's satire, I think it allows us to talk about some really dark things that we might not be able to do. And we in the overall portrayal of conversion camp, or like a reparative therapy camp overall, but also some of the particular character quirks, like the lesbian who's into pain, for example, that the satire allows us to talk about some of the really scary pieces of it. But it is still very real. And so, like, just to be clear, we did a little bit of research. So this is as of yesterday.
Yes, I love that kind of research.
Before recording. So March 30th, 2022, conversion therapy is still legal in the UK. A few years ago, they came very close to ending conversion therapy, but ended up not passing it. And it was really controversial. There was this big gender affairs committee that people resigned over it. There were major debates about it. People were acknowledging that religious exemptions to a conversion therapy ban would be reasonable as recently as last year. And actually just today, some document leaked from the UK government saying that they were still not going to ban conversion therapy. And then the internet exploded and they had to backtrack. But so this is still a very contentious thing. In Australia, it's state by state, but it's still legal in many states in Australia. It's state by state in the US. So it's banned in California, Colorado, Connecticut, Maine, Maryland, and Delaware. A handful of other states, as well as DC.
I believe Illinois is on that list as well.
Illinois?
I'm
awesome.
Pretty sure.
It's 21 states total.
I'm pretty sure Illinois is on that list. Just because we're a blue oasis, really, right now.
Lucky jerk. Canada just banned it in December of 2021. New Zealand just banned it last month. And out of the rest of the world, as far as we can find, Brazil, Ecuador, Germany, EU, and Malta. So the vast majority of countries, it's still legal.
And just to be clear, in the UK, they're saying they might now pass it, but that would only be for orientation and not for gender identity. And so that's also in some places still on the table, even if other bans are in place. If they're only for sexual orientation, they may not apply.
Right. That's critical to note, because you could see a camp. You could see these camps working under the guise of one, because they can't do the other, but still operating.
Yeah. And it was only very recently that medical professionals themselves stopped doing that, having these kind of reorientation for gender types of trainings and treatments.
Well, and again, to be clear, they're not all done. There are still very prominent therapists and sex researchers who still promote reorientating, as one of the characters says in the movie, reorientating therapies.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I chuckled at that one.
True directions.
Exactly.
So all that to say, it's a really funny movie, and we're gonna laugh a lot
Yes,
about it.
as
But
I just did.
it's about a very serious thing, and I don't want to undermine that.
And for the second clip, I wanted to explore a more recent episode, episode 89, where Dr. Wynn Goodfriend joined me again to discuss a classic film. And what I mean by classic film is it is a, black and white film and from the 1940s, Gaslight. And in this clip, Wind is telling us how she decided to incorporate this film into her psych and film course and the term gaslight and how her students use and view the term gaslight and the fact that this is the film that coined gaslighting, which was the 2022 word of the year. Why do you include this film in your psych and film class?
Yeah, part of it is my students, I've noticed more and more, use the term gaslight kind of nonchalantly, and mostly they're using it correctly, but more and more I notice that they use it kind of humorously, or
Yeah.
they certainly have no idea what the origin of the term is. They don't know
Sure.
it comes from this movie, which of course was originally a play. They don't really know what the context of the word is. And so partially I use this as a history lesson to know what is the origin of this term.
Yeah.
But also because when I show films on this topic of relationship violence, usually the film focuses on physical violence.
Yeah.
And I really like that this film has psychological violence. And there really aren't that many films that really feature the psychological kind of manipulation that can go on in an intimate relationship.
Yeah, I find that to be a great endeavor, combining the cinema history, cultural history, and then just like another aspect of how abuse can occur in a relationship. I find it interesting that you say that your students use it mostly correctly. I find the exact opposite when I hear my young students use it. And we'll get into what it is and what it isn't in a moment, but I feel like overall they're using it in a way that reflects the momentary passing rather than the long journey that gaslighting technically is, right? And I think that's attributable to the film itself too, because we're talking about a long stretch of time. We don't really know how much time has passed. We know that Gregory and Paula are together for 2 weeks before they get married and head back to London. But, we don't really know how much longer it's been for the rest of the movie. What was that factoid that makes it prescient, though, that you wanted to share?
Yeah, so I actually remember when this happened in 2002.
I do as well.
Merriam-Webster always chooses a word of the year. And so in 2002, gaslight was the word of the year. I'm sorry, I'm saying 2002. You're right, absolutely, 2022. Their word of the year was gaslight. And I remember being really excited about this being their choice. And thinking people are going to go watch the movie and research on relationship violence is going to be in the media, and that totally did not happen.
Yeah, absolutely not. That was asking a lot.
Yeah, so I was excited for nothing, which happens a lot, I guess, in the world of psychology. I thought, all these wonderful things will happen.
Yeah.
And no, people just started using the word, and apparently many of them are using it incorrectly.
Well, yeah, I mean, I suppose it depends, right? You're in Iowa, I'm in Illinois. There's definitely a cultural difference there too.
That is true.
So yeah, I thought this was interesting. By 2022, had gaslight been in your course, or was it a more recent addition?
No, I started adding it just the last couple of years that I've taught the course. I wasn't using it before, partially because this term wasn't really in the lexicon until more recently. So I was using it sort of in research to refer to this sort of psychological abuse that happens. But most of my students hadn't really heard the term gaslighting until maybe about 5 years ago.
Yeah. Okay.
So I've only added it to the syllabus for the last couple of times that I've taught the course.
Interesting how you take the cultural impact of a tiny little word, right? And it becomes part of the instruction, right? And using the film here, the whole purpose of this podcast, really, using that film there to teach these this subject, these subjects, these concepts so very clearly and vividly. The final segment in this clip show, although it's not technically the final segment, I have a little bonus segment coming along that has nothing to do with the subdiscipline of psychology. But in this final subdiscipline of psychology segment, I wanted to incorporate the historical aspects of psychology that have appeared in film. And there have been a few explorations of psychological history on the show over the years. The first clip is from episode 64, where I discuss the film A Dangerous Method with Dr. Sheila Thomas, which is a film that explores the rivalry between Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. And in this clip, Sheila explains the differences between the two men historically and how they're portrayed in the film as well. Now, that was a fascinating discussion. And Freud has been on this show a lot, actually, because he is so deeply embedded into Western psychology. But man, oh man, I don't know if you caught it, but I giggled when Sheila mentions them being geniuses. They were something, all right. Geniuses, maybe.
I mean, Freud himself actually saw himself on a continuum, really, with someone like Charles Darwin, whose views were not readily accepted, were actually attacked and challenged by the establishment. And Freud seems to be very much in that kind of that tradition, in that these are radical ways of thinking about human beings. And I think to actually see that struggle, and the tensions that it evokes, really impresses upon us how fortunate we were to have these two geniuses. And I think you can also see how the zeitgeist of early 20th century Vienna shaped their thinking.
And Zurich.
Because sometimes when you read Freudian theory now, it can seem very remote, and you kind of think, really? Is that the case?
Yeah.
Is this valid? But actually, when you see it in the context of the place where it was developed, and I think this comes through especially with the female characters in the film, I think you really gain a much deeper appreciation of where Freud and Jung are both coming from. So, they are similar in many ways. They do share lots of commonalities. So, for example, I mean, they were both born into very modest family circumstances. So Freud was the son of a wool merchant. Jung was actually the son of a very poor pastor in Switzerland. They both studied medicine before moving on to psychiatry or psychology. But they both acknowledged just how important the unconscious mind is in human psychology. So they have this fundamental basis for being drawn together. But as we see in the film, there are quite a number of differences and tensions that emerge. And I think it is, it's very striking to see, they're both geniuses in their own right, but actually very different in many ways.
Oh, absolutely. They are two sides of a coin, in my view.
Absolutely, yeah. So, I mean, with Freud, you have, this kind of old established theoretician that he was. And then you have, the up and coming Jung who's making his name. Obviously, Freud was Austrian and Jewish, and Jung was Swiss and from a Christian background. You've got Freud is a really faithful family man, actually. And I think we see that most clearly in the film when Jung visits Freud in Berggasse, and he has dinner with the family. And there's this quite amusing shot of, the whole family gathered around the dinner table looking very expectantly.
Well, because
their visitor.
Jung was taking all the food. They're like,
absolutely,
oh, crap, I'm not going to get any.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you contrast that, with the sort of lavish house that Freud's very affluent wife is able to provide him with.
Absolutely,
and of course, Jung is a philanderer. I mean, he's kind of, he loves Emma, but it doesn't prevent him forming relationships with Sabine Spielrein and then later on Toni Wolff.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get Freud being quite dogged by ill health. So we see him collapse at the conference, which actually did happen in real life. That is not created for dramatic effect. It did happen. And Jung did come to his assistance in that.
Yep.
And then you see Jung, quite healthful and energetic.
He does live a lot longer.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Freud was, as we know, he was a cocaine addict, and he was also, addicted to his cigars, which actually killed him in the end through oral cancer. So, but I think we see the juxtaposition most clearly in the scene when they're boarding the ship to travel to the States, when we see how Jung kind of says, well, I'm going this way into the first class area provided for by his wife, and Freud is obviously not able to do that. You also get the juxtaposition of their views on the paranormal, which I think comes through very clearly in their discussions. So Freud has no interest in the occult, whereas Jung is absolutely drawn by paranormal phenomena. And again, in the film, we have that incident of where there's the sound from the bookcase that Jung anticipates, and he knows it's going to happen, and it does happen. And again, that is a real life event that did happen, but they didn't speak about it after it had occurred. But this fits really closely with Jung's views in that he was very drawn to the spiritual, to the occult, to the idea of symbols and totems, which comes through in his theory of the collective unconscious.
The second clip that I wanted to throw in here features two of my good friends, and sadly, one who has recently passed on. So this is from episode 44, where we discuss the filmmaking choices to portray the real Stanford Prison Experiment, called The Stanford Prison Experiment, and that's the name of the film. And it features Dr. Kelly Breitman and the late, great Dr. Jen Simons. And Jen, you were an amazing human being, and I hope that both episode 44 and this clip show immortalizes you in a way that embodies who you were as a person. And I'm so happy to have known you, and I hope that you are resting in a wonderful peace. Let's first start out with your initial thoughts on the film, and then we'll talk about psychology coming to life and go through some of the nitty-gritty stuff. So I'll let you two give your initial thoughts about the film, and then I'll sort of bookend that with mine. So Jen, why don't you go ahead and go first?
Sure. I thought it was well done as a film. And I read a number of reviews because I was thinking, okay, we psychologists, I've watched clips from this. I've known about this for a really long time, but I'm curious about how do people who don't know about this say. And I agreed with their perspective, that it really looks like a documentary. They really capture the claustrophobia of it. And any of us with PhDs in psychology, some with masters in psychology, depending on the kind of research they did, are familiar with cramped research quarters. And I think it feels like a psychology building. It feels like cramped research quarters. It really had that real feel to it. And I also thought they placed things really well. I thought the opening credits really placed things well in the early 70s. And I particularly noted the rubber cement, and I was a child in the 70s, and yes, bring on the rubber cement. So, but I thought costume wise, placement wise, set decoration. I thought they really captured everything really well. A lot of times films will really have some anachronistic costuming or hairstyles or something, but I thought they really captured things well. So they set it well. And I thought it flowed real well. I thought the acting was really strong. And they spent all that time in that small space, and the ensemble feel of it really came through. And so, overall, I was impressed as a film. I mean, of course, with a lot of back knowledge. I mean, I have watched so many of the original footage so many times, but but I thought it was really brought to life well.
Yeah, I agree. Kelly, what were your initial
Yeah,
thoughts?
yeah, I agree with Jen. And the film is 6 or 7 years old now, and this was the
Right.
first time I had watched it. I hadn't seen it when it came out, and in part just because, like Jen said, we've seen the footage so much that I really just thought, is this going to be entertaining, or do I know all of this? And truthfully, it was a little boring because it felt so accurate. It felt so in line with what I've seen on YouTube, and when we watched it in class, and I was like, oh yeah, that's literally what they said in that in the footage.
Right.
But seeing it dramatized did bring it to life a little bit more for me. And watching it play out, I feel even more angry having seen it, than I even felt, just seeing the footage or reading about it. And I think especially as a mom, to imagine, because I have a 13-year-old and she watched it with me, and she rarely puts down her phone. She's watching TikTok all the time, but she was so engrossed in this film that she set her phone down, and she was pretty captivated. So I forget sometimes how dramatic it can feel if you don't know the backstory to this. But as a mom, I was really angry for how those students were mistreated. And especially knowing, the protocols and the procedures that we put in place. And then seeing how none of that was really, done well was really frustrating.
I agree with that. And just to add to a little bit of what you said, Kelly, about your 13-year-old. So my wife Astrid watched it with me, and she knows a little bit about the backstory too, just through marital osmosis. And she was extremely captivated as well. Just gobsmacked the entire time, like aghast, jaw on the floor kind of way. And I first didn't watch it when it came out in 2015, but I first watched it with my history of psych class, because I was like, this movie is perfect to discuss the history of ethics and social psychology. So, it pulled double duty there. So I always knew that it was going to be on this show eventually. And so I'm glad the two of you were like, yeah, let's do it. As far as my thoughts on the film, I thought it was an amazing portrayal of real life events. And as you mentioned, Jen, documentary feeling. Yeah. So reviews that come out from the people who are like, oh, I thought I was watching a documentary on a psych experiment. And I think that's completely accurate with the way that they sort of kept it going. And at no point was I like, man, what's going to happen next? I mean, like you both said, kind of knew what was going to happen because Zimbardo decided to film it all. I don't know if that was a good choice or a bad choice on his part, but he did. And so we're left with a comparison, and it's quite a stark comparison. And Jen, you mentioned about the claustrophobia. And I wanted to specifically bring that up too, because one of the things that I pointed out to Astrid while they were watching, because I also pay attention to like film techniques and these kinds of things, is they were always zoomed in on the prisoner and guards' faces. And when a filmmaker uses that film technique, they want the audience to feel uneasy, because nobody is that close to anybody's face unless you're like about to kiss them.
Or you're in The Sopranos, or those films where they have people stand way too close. NCIS, like so many of them, they have people stand way too close.
But even in those cases, like the shot is away from the two of them, right? So it's two people who are in the shot that are far too close to each other, and that's obviously for people who like their personal space, like, whoa, back it up. But in this one, it's the camera right up in the face. And so for Ezra Miller's character, 8612, you're constantly up in his face, like, oh, I see Ezra Miller's nose hairs. Or the guard, the mean guard, I can't think of his name right now, but the John Wayne character, as he was called, just in his mustache, and you essentially feel this along with watching it. So I thought it was a good film, definitely a sleeper, under the radar kind of movie. Not a lot of people have seen it, so
When Billy Kudrup was wonderful.
He was.
Oh, so good, and not bad. Even as Phil Zimbardo, not bad to look at.
Right? Indeed. Yeah, he really brought some charisma to the role.
He did. Although Zimbardo has complained that he didn't use his hands enough because Zimbardo's Sicilian, and And, Zimbardo has said that they did not exaggerate what's in this film. It's interesting, his commentary. I mean, we'll get to those kinds of things. But in terms of Billy Crudup, is it pronounced Crudup?
I pronounce it Crudup.
Crudup, yeah, I don't know. But in terms of his acting, that was Zimbardo's commentaries. Like, he did a good job, but he's like,
not enough.
Leave it to somebody.
Not enough Sicilian. Yeah. Leave it to Z.
Leave it to,
I'll just keep calling him Z.
Leave it to somebody who has garnered, that kind of ego over the decades. Like, I don't think this good actor acted me very well.
And the irony, he's critiquing the portrayal of the personality versus the situation.
Yes. Irony of ironies.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, Jen was spot on with her initial analysis of the film. Having watched it again recently in my history of psychology class, she was spot on. Spot on. As she said, a child of the 70s. Spot on. I love it. This bonus segment, the last segment here that I wanted to share with you, my favorite episode. I was recently asked last year what my favorite episode of the podcast was because we were coming up on the 100th episode, and I loved them all. You are all my babies. Every guest that has been on has been absolutely wonderful because you came on and you talked to me. You talked to me about movies, you talked to me about psychology. But I have a special place in my heart for episode 68. This is when Dr. Jim Davies, cognitive psychologist up in Canada, and Hollywood composer Joe Kramer joined me to discuss their collaborative effort to describe the musical choices and the psychology of the music of Star Wars. Star Wars is one of my top 5 films of all time. And so anytime I can talk about Star Wars is a good time for me. And of course, the music has been so embedded into pop culture since 1977 that I don't think anyone can walk down the street and not hear that big fanfare and go, what was that? And so this clip here is a sort of extended clip of Joe and Jim talking about the initial development by John Williams of the intro theme that turns into a little bit of Luke's theme, and then the psychology of how it makes you feel, and not only that, the psychology of how it makes you feel, but the choices that were made to make you feel that way. And this is the part of filmmaking. This is the part of the how the sausage is made that I find extremely fascinating. So here is a quick peek at that segment. I definitely recommend the entire episode. Let's talk about the music. John Williams scored this amazing soundtrack. And in the chapter, I think you guys have a great breakdown of the broad ideas and then the psychology of those strategies and practices that John Williams did. And I think I think what the reader could pull from this, and I think our discussion today, is those broad psych concepts can be applied to how John Williams scored this movie. So what I want to first start with is that the main title, okay? Mm-hmm. One of the things that to have been a member of the audience at the time, unfortunately the first film predates me, but I remember the first time I saw it, just bam, right in your face. Big Star Wars, big fanfare. So talk to us about the main title and the main theme and the psych concepts associated with this iconic sound.
Okay, well, the first thing is that, like a lot of things, it evolved. The movie begins really with the 20th Century Fox fanfare, which is in the key of B-flat. It was written by Alfred Newman in the 30s or 40s. It was the 20th Century Fox fanfare. And it's in B-flat, and so they decided that the score, the main title, would also be in B-flat. Same key.
Okay.
So that the Fox fanfare ends up as a sort of intro to the score. And in fact, certain releases of John's soundtrack, of Williams' soundtrack, actually included the Fox fanfare because so many people felt like it was sort of the doorbell that begins the score. Now there are on a special collector's edition of the original score from '77, there is a bonus track of all 5 takes of the main title.
No way.
Two of which were edited together to create the version that's in the film. And in take one, there's actually a sort of introductory crescendo chord that would have been over the black,
mm-hmm.
and then builds to the big B-flat major chord when the word Star Wars appears on the screen. So even that sort of magic moment that as little kids we were waiting in that darkness and silence for the big, originally that wasn't how it originally began. But after take one, I think they decided, no, we'll get rid of that.
Okay.
So it evolved to what we saw. And I think what you'll find with a lot of John Williams things is that he's not afraid to try something, and him and Lucas had the kind of relationship where they could do stuff and it could evolve. So once we get to that big fanfare, what we've got is a sort of 4 bars of like a brassy kind of flourish. The trumpets are doing sort of celebratory. The horns are doing a counterpoint to that, and the trombones are doing a third part. And this is all kind of like, the entrance of a king, for example, or the unveiling of a glorious army. It's a celebratory fanfare. And then the theme kicks in. And it goes into like a very sort of 1-2, 1-2, militaristic dun 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 dun. And what he does is that's clever is that the melody is an upward. The contour of the melody is up. It's always reaching.
Okay.
So bum bum ba 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 bum bum ba 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 bum. But the other thing is that it's sort of off the beat. It's a little syncopated. So it's like bum bum ba 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 bum bum ba 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 bum. So where the pulse is falling, it's around those bar lines, and it just creates. It's like tension and resolution.
Okay.
That what you're off the beat, and then you bring us on the beat. Ba 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 bum bum ba bum bum ba na 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 ba da dee dum da da dum, and that melody then goes from the brass. That melody is in the strings, and it's got a soaring sort of sweeping quality that's different than the more strident military theme of the sort of A section of the main title. Okay. And the form of that opening is basically like A A B A A. So it's basically we have what at the time was called Luke's theme, but sort of became the overall sort of saga theme.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have that middle part, which because of the Mecho disco record, I always associate with the robots, but it doesn't really have any specific character aligned with it. That's the da na 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 na. And then we go back to the main theme, and it goes through 2 iterations of that. One is with the horns, and then with the full orchestra. And then, as the crawl begins to, become unreadable as it fades into the distance, that's when we get the score in its sort of proper begin. And we have these sort of dissonant chords that settle down to like a sort of typical outer space chord, which is like a major chord with a flat 6 on top. So sort of you've got that.
Yeah.
Which is sort of, the magical sound of like.
Right. Yes.
And, Williams is really leaning very heavily on all of our associations with music right away, right off the bat in those first 2 to 3 minutes.
Yeah, and I feel like because he had always envisioned this to be more of a space fantasy kind of opera, bigger than the science fiction that had come before it. He wanted it to be bigger than
Lucas too.
Yeah. Yes, Lucas. Right.
Yeah, that Lucas's original instinct. He went to Spielberg and he said, I'm making this Star Wars movie. I need somebody who understands old-fashioned movie scoring. And Spielberg was like, I've got just the guy, because he had done Jaws and Sugarland with Williams. And, Williams went in, and Lucas's first thing to him was like, I'm thinking of using classical music the way Kubrick did. And Williams said, well, if we do that, we're locked into those pieces. If we write our own music in the style of those composers, then we can do whatever we want with the themes that we create. We can do them forwards, backwards, upside down, fast, slow. And so that's when Williams, sort of won Lucas over to an original score. But again, keeping that concept of, Lucas's thing was, I'm going to be showing the audience places they've never seen. I'm dumping, Lucas loved to make movies. When he made his first film, THX 1138, he said, "This is not a film about the future. This is a film that somehow fell into the present from the future." And he was obsessed with, he was obsessed with foreign film.
Right.
So his idea was, I just want to drop people in the middle of the story without any context. And he said, the music will be the context. The music will be what gives the audience that root in the familiar.
So Jim, why then, after so many years, we're coming up on 50 years now. Oof. Why? Wow. Just putting a number on that. Why does then this main title fanfare and then the progression into the score give people goosebumps?
There's a lot of nostalgia, of course. I mean, it's the kind of thing where everybody on Earth practically knows Star Wars, and so you just have to put the music on, and people get a feeling. I felt this when I was writing the chapter, but Joe's description of this stuff is so incredibly rich and interesting, and I'm trying to speak to the psychology of it, but in terms of what we've done scientific studies of, and it's so primitive compared to like the on the ground understanding that a composer like Joe has. I'm going to talk a little bit about it. It's still interesting, but like Joe mentioned the reaching, and I thought that was such a great description of this thing where the notes go higher and higher, but they sort of fall back. So da 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 da. Da, 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 and it gets even, so it goes back before it goes higher. So it's almost like I picture it like trying to climb a hill, and you slide down a little, and then you get a little bit higher, and and that is ultimately a really positive, exciting kind of thing. And one thing that we know from psychology is that the mind works in metaphors, and one of the main metaphors. Well, when I say that, I mean when we have abstract concepts, we tend to understand them in terms of thinking about concrete things. And one of the big ones is up and down. So up and upward motion and being high and versus downward motion and being low. This is a very primitive understanding. We live in a world with gravity, and when things are up high, they tend to be more alive, awake, healthy, and when they're down low, they're either dead or sleeping or weak or something like that, fallen over. And that is the theory of why we associate up with good. Okay,
right,
so this is big thing that up is good and down is bad. Now, a really deeper question is, why do we associate high notes with up? And that is actually a little bit harder to tease out. Things that are higher up tend to be smaller. When you hit smaller things together, they make a higher pitch.
Sure.
Your Adam's apple raises when you make a higher pitch. Maybe bigger animals are on the ground and they make a lower pitch. All of that might contribute to why we actually call high notes high. Sometimes when I talk to people about that, they say, well, it's a higher frequency. It's like, yeah, but we talked about high notes long before we knew what a frequency was.
Absolutely.
It predates all of that. And if you look at other languages, we get the same dynamic. We call low and high pitches might be called light and heavy, young and old, weak and strong, small and large in all these different languages, but they all correspond to the thing that you'd think that they do. The small pitch is the high pitch, and so when we have this reaching, it sounds good. It sounds like things are getting better. Things are struggling, but they're getting better. Based on this really interesting metaphor of mine.
So good, and I'm remembering how I decided to put the music as a music bed, right? So underneath everyone's talking is the music, and sometimes it gets loud when there's a break in the music. I think my editing skills have definitely gotten better since that episode, and I think I would have made some changes. I think I would have made some different edits, but be that as it may, it's a great episode with wonderful music. And that's going to wrap up this clip show. Probably one of the longer episodes because the clips, ranged from 4 minutes to 12 or whatever. But, I really enjoyed putting this clip show together. I spent a good portion of my time compiling these clips and finding the sections of the transcripts. That's right. Every episode has a transcript now, and a disclaimer: they were transcribed by AI, but I think they're pretty good. The models are getting a lot better as time goes on, and so as long as we speak clearly, it finds the words. Now, Does it have names associated with what's being said? No, but you could follow along if you really wanted to. You could do that, and that's the least I could do. I wish the transcripts were better, but I'm only one person, and like I said, I have a full-time job that I have to follow and to do stuff for, and then of course kids and family time. So it's the least I could do, and I wanted to do it as an accessibility option. And granted, it could be better, and I get that. Thank you for being part of these first 100 episodes. I know it's 101, but from here on out, let's do it. Let's have a lot more fun. The revamped website, the resources page, the films page database, the tags, the transcripts, everything. It's just going to get better and better, and I'm so excited. Follow us on the socials and look forward to the next several episodes. I'm going to have a former professor who now does filmmaking documentaries. So we're going to explore filmmaking in a future episode. We're going to have a scholar of psychodynamic theory and black film on the show. Criminality and behavior, that's going to be on the show in the next several months. Like I said, Jill Swirsky is going to join us to discuss Wicked, another musical, right? Another musical turned film. There's so much coming, and I'm looking forward to it all, and I hope you join us for that. And that's going to do it for this episode. Until the next one, thanks for listening. Truly.